FNAF is a series that has become synonymous with the word confusing. You already know this franchise is one of the biggest mindfucks out there. With 12 games of questionable lore relevance, 3 separate book series, and a movie series as well, FNAF has so many contained and overlapping stories that making a concrete timeline seems impossible. But what if I were to tell you that it actually is impossible? And it all stems back to one lie that Scott told 8 years ago. Well, it technically wasn't a lie back then, but it definitely is now. Let me explain. The word retcon gets tossed around a lot when discussing FNAF lore, so much so that 3 months before the release of Pizza Sim, Scott Cawthon made a Reddit post clarifying that in the entire series up to that point, there had only been one retcon, and that it was seamlessly woven into the lore, with nobody having noticed. Specifically, he said, "The truth is that I've done one actual retcon in the series, although I'm not going to say where it was. There have been other times, however, when my original intentions didn't come across clearly. In those instances, I make a point to clarify in the next game. That's not really a retcon, it's simply an attempt to guide the story toward where it was originally intended to go." Now, a little fun fact is that the word retcon technically doesn't mean what everyone thinks it does. See, the common use of the word is to describe a piece of established information that gets changed retroactively, hence, retroactive continuity. Retcon. You can look to Star Wars for some really notable examples of this. There was a Clone Wars animated miniseries that got completely erased from canon when the Clone Wars show was made. There was an entire extended universe of books and games that all got deemed non-canon when Disney greenlit the sequel trilogy, and even within those 3 movies, Rey's heritage is retconned from being a nobody to being a Palpatine. But if you look at the actual definition of the word retcon, it doesn't actually refer to this. The definition is a piece of new information that imposes a different interpretation on previously described events. So, by definition, anything that makes you look back at the media differently is a retcon. That means that plot twists, prequels, and flashbacks are all examples of retcons by definition. With that, you can say that everything after FNAF 1 is essentially a retcon, meaning that Scott lied in his Reddit post. Case closed. Thanks for watching, everyone. Kidding, I'm kidding. When the word retcon is used, it's essentially always referring to a piece of established continuity that gets changed after the initial release, which is the definition that I will be using for this video. Ever since Secret of the Mimic came out in June, I've seen the retcon debate swell up again. A lot of people are convinced that the story is being written and rewritten as it goes, but others are saying that people are just salty that their theories are being disproven. They cling to this Reddit post and say that there is only one retcon in the series and are unwilling to see any other perspective. So, I want to take a look through the entire FNAF series again, but this time, I'm specifically looking at what each project contributes to the overall story. I'll look at the games, the books, whatever is available to me I will use, but forgive me, I'm not going to cover every story. There are at least 26 books in the series, and most of them are split into 3 stories and an epilogue. Some of them are just more relevant than others, and some are there to be interesting stories with certain FNAF concepts. As wicked and fucked up as the Breaking Wheel is, it doesn't have deeper meaning other than being another type of Springlock story. So, I know I'm going to be going over information that everybody already knows, but I think it's best to be 100% sure we cover everything. So, I'm going to do this retrospective style. I'm going to treat each game as if we're covering it for the first time and put all of the info into a timeline. As each game adds to the story, I will be amending the timeline. So, let's do this.
So, FNAF 1 is honestly a pretty clear-cut game in terms of story. We all know by now that Scott didn't envision a super long franchise when he made the first game, so the biggest things we get here are Easter eggs. Obviously, the phone calls tell one story, while everything else can be inferred from Easter eggs that appear throughout the game. See, the phone calls walk you through the general gameplay and give smaller hints towards what's really going on. Of course, the first big lore dump is that the animatronics get a little quirky at night, which is followed by the Bite of 87. The first thing that Scott decided to tell us was that somewhere at a previous location, somebody lost their frontal lobe, and that was the incident that made it so the animatronics weren't allowed to freely roam anymore. Besides this, he also tells you that the animatronics will likely see you as an endoskeleton with no suit, so if they catch you, they'll stuff you into an empty costume, and you'll die. Obviously, you see this in the game over screen, but Phone Guy does mention something interesting. He says,
the only parts of you that would likely see the light of day again would be your eyeballs and teeth when they pop out the front of the mask.
Again, something we see in the game over screen. But this also correlates to one of the aforementioned Easter eggs. See, these Easter eggs range from creepy camera renders to actual lore dumps hidden in pieces of paper on the cameras. When you flip to the East Hall cam, you're usually greeted by a little poster that gives you the safety rules for Freddy's. No running, no yelling, screaming, touching Freddy, or pooping on the floor. You know, the usual. But there is a 4% chance each time you flip up the camera that the poster will change to one of 4 news clippings, detailing a tragedy that happened at the pizzeria. 5 kids were reported missing, having been lured into the back of the restaurant by a man dressed in a mascot suit. The man was caught on camera and was charged with the murders, but the bodies of the kids were never found. After these disappearances, Fazbear struggled to stay in business for a year, with parents noticing an awful smell coming from the robots and what seemed to be blood and mucus leaking from their eyes. As the article puts it, they're described as reanimated carcasses. Seem familiar? Phone Guy says the only part of you that would see the light are your eyes, and that's exactly where the leakage of blood and mucus comes from. 5 kids were lured into the back room by a man in a mascot suit. He killed them and stuffed them inside the suits, and not only are their bodies rotting in there, but their souls are trapped too. If the poster changing to the news articles didn't make it clear, the place is also haunted as fuck. Posters changed left and right, not only the safety rules, but also ones in this hallway, and the one in the West Hall corner. The text on Foxy's out of order sign can also change, so many things point to this building being haunted. But nothing points to that more than Golden Freddy. The one robot that comes into the office whether your doors are open or closed, who crashes your game when he kills you, who only appears through a poster changing on the cams. Accompanying him is the message, "It's me," which we all know becomes important, but doesn't really make sense here. Like I said, FNAF 1 is pretty cut and dry. It hints at a bigger story, but what you need to know is all there. There aren't really any loose ends besides the bite of 87, I guess, and maybe why Golden Freddy behaves the way he does. Otherwise, the information in the game gives a clear series of events that we can easily map out. June 26th, anywhere before or maybe even in the year 1987, 5 kids are lured to a back room of the pizzeria and killed. They're stuffed into the animatronic suits and the bodies are never found, but the killer is arrested, having been seen on camera using the mascot suit to lure kids. Also in 1987 is the bite of 87, where one of the animatronics bites someone, resulting in them losing their frontal lobe. I put the MCI before this because it's safe to assume that the animatronics getting possessed would lead them to lash out in some way, hence the bite. Now, due to some logic with the paychecks, thank you Matt Pat, we miss you, we know that FNAF 1 takes place during November of 1993. Specifically, Night 5 is the 12th and Night 6 is the 13th. Phone Guy mentions that he was finishing his time on the night shift just before we started, so I think it's safe to say that he recorded the calls the week before we started, placing his death around November 4th, and our character gets fired on November 14th. One of the newspaper clippings says that the pizzeria is closing down due to many years of struggling following the MCI. It says that it's closing by year's end, which means that we end off this timeline around December of 1993 with this restaurant closing. These are probably the only genuine dates you're going to be getting, and the simplest the timeline's ever going to look. So let's keep going and see what gets added. Okay, so FNAF 2 has a much larger story to tell, and it does so pretty much in the same way that the first one does, through Easter eggs. There are a lot more lore ones this time and a lot less random ones, so let's break down what this game tells us. Immediately upon opening the game for the first time, you get hit with a cutscene. You're positioned as Freddy and all you can do is look left and right at Chica and Bonnie. Clearly, this is the FNAF 1 location, as seen by the models of the animatronics, as well as the dining area. Nothing really happens in the first cutscene, but the next ones get increasingly weirder. After beating Night 2, Bonnie and Chica turn towards you. After Night 3, they're fully facing you, and Golden Freddy is now in front of you. After Night 4, Bonnie and Chica are back to their first position, but now the puppet follows your eye movement. So, this tells us that the puppet was also one of the original animatronics. She's seen here in the original Pizzeria with the main trio and Golden Freddy. I guess we gotta keep this in mind. Upon starting a new game, you'll see that this new location is a grand reopening with a new set of animatronics. Upon starting the game, you're greeted with a familiar voice. Phone guy. But he died, right? Well, that's the first hint that this game is a prequel, with the nail in the coffin being the paychecks you get at the end of Night 5. November 12th, 1987. We're getting new information about the past of Fazbear Entertainment. So, what else? Well, here's what we can say for certain. First and foremost, the phone calls give a lot more information this time. This is a grand reopening of Freddy's following the last location closing due to the MCI. The original animatronics sit in the back room, while the new ones are fitted with the latest tech. Facial recognition tied to a database that would let the animatronics spot a predator before they could do anything. Phone Guy jokes about how impressive they are during Night 1.
Heck, we should be paying them to guard you.
On a later night, he talks more about the old suits in the back. Like I said, they're from the old location, and Fazbear Entertainment has made an attempt to retrofit them with new technology, but gave up because they were old, ugly, and the phone guy specifically mentions that they have an awful smell. Anyways, the game actually goes out of its way to tell you what's going on. In what is honestly a rare move for Scott, the story of this game is very clearly told through the phone calls and death minigames. See, when you die, there's something like a 10% chance that one of 4 minigames will queue up. In one, you play as Foxy, running from Pirate's Cove into a room of 5 kids. You do this 3 times total, and on the 3rd time, a purple guy shows up in the bottom left corner, smiling. You run into the room, and all 5 kids are dead now. Funnily enough, I've started with the most confusing one. It's hard to tell exactly what this one is supposed to be. This is a tiny 2-room building if we're to believe what we're seeing. But the imagery is consistent with what we know about the MCI, which really is just the 5 dead kids. Personally, I don't know if there is a super in-depth and accurate explanation, so let's just say that this is a visual aid to tell us that the purple guy over here is the one responsible for the MCI. Next up, we got Take Cake to the Children. In this one, you're seemingly Freddy, walking around and giving cake to 6 kids who go from happy to incredibly angry. While doing this, there is a child outside the building who is bawling their eyes out. In the background, there's a voice spelling out, "Save him." All you can do is watch as a purple car drives up. The same purple guy from the last minigame gets out of the car, and the poor kid starts crying even harder before they're killed, and the purple guy drives off. The minigame ends with the puppet jump scaring you, implying that this is the soul that possesses the puppet. This is further evidenced by the design of the kid here and the design of the puppet. See, while this specific sprite of a gray body with tear streaks would become the default representation of dead kids in the series, FNAF 2 has 4 different sprites used to represent dead kids in these minigames. In the Foxy Go 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 minigame, the MCI victims look like this. In the other 2 minigames, the bodies look different but similar, having a similar slouched position, but they're still 2 distinct sprites. But the one in this minigame is specifically made to be different. It has the big black eyes and 2 very noticeable tear streaks that are left there after they die. The puppet shares this design, linking the 2 together before this jump scare seals the deal. Anyways, the next minigame also has to do with the puppet. This one's referred to as Give Gifts, Give Life, where you play as the puppet giving gifts to 4 slumped over bodies. After this, the game switches to the Give Life section, where you go around the same 4 bodies, but this time, you put an animatronic head on them. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. But for a split second, once you've put the last head on, a fifth body shows up, immediately followed by a Golden Freddy jump scare. This tells us that the puppet sorta helped guide the spirits into the animatronics after they were murdered. Then, there's the final minigame, only referred to as Save Them. In this one, you control Withered Freddy, and you're led around the FNAF 2 pizzeria by the puppet. As you explore, you find puddles of blood and another 5 bodies scattered throughout the building. In the background, you can hear the same voice spell out, Save Them. On very rare occasions, the purple guy can spawn in and chase you, and when he touches you, the game crashes. Although before it does, a message can be spotted in the corner of your screen, simply saying, "You can't." In context, this would be the purple guy's response to you being asked to save the kids. Save them, you can't. This, coupled with the phone calls during the last 4 nights, tell us everything we need to know about the story. See, Phone Guy mentioned something about a rumor going around during Night 3 that we should ignore, but as the nights progress, things get worse and worse. On Night 4, we're told that there's an investigation and that the animatronics are behaving weirdly towards the adults and staff of the restaurant. On Night 5, he tells us that the building is going on lockdown and that previous employees are no longer welcome in the building. Finally, on Night 6, alongside the Save Them minigame, you get the full picture. Phone Guy tells you that somebody used a spare suit in the back, a yellow suit, and now all the animatronics aren't acting properly. This is also the same night that Golden Freddy appears in the game. He can only show up during nights 6 and 7, so it kinda implies a connection between him and the yellow suit Phone Guy mentions. But nevertheless, here's how everything played out. The sprite used during the Save Them minigame shows the purple guy with a security badge, revealing that he is an employee. So this guy used his access to the building to take a yellow suit from the back room, killed another 5 kids. Whether just the act of these murders set off the animatronics, or these kids now possess the toy robots, the animatronics start to act a lot more aggressively towards the staff of the pizzeria and adults in general. On top of that, the fact that 5 kids were murdered during the opening week of the restaurant gets the place shut down fast. But before it closes, there's one more birthday party and one last night shift. The character you play as during the first 6 nights, Jeremy Fitzgerald, gets moved to the day shift, and for the custom night you play as someone named Fritz Smith. Now, this isn't outright stated, but due to the fact that the game takes place in 1987, and the restaurant is actively being shut down, people believe that this final birthday party is where the bite of 87 happens, and it's also generally believed that Jeremy is the one who gets bit during his day shift. Then, Fritz is fired after his shift for tampering with the animatronics, and odor, same as the first game. But this time, it's also noted that he was getting fired on his first day, so he was specifically hired to do the night shift following Jeremy being moved to the day shift. The last thing to clear up is the thing with the purple guy. I don't really know if I need to talk about it, but just in case, a common theory floating around back then is that there were 2 killers, brought on by the fact that the purple guy has a different sprite in Save Them than he does in Foxy Go 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 and Take Cake. Looking back, it also kinda works with the fact that the first game says the killer was caught, so maybe the one in Take Cake and Foxy Go 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 was the original, and the new one in Save Them is someone else? Well, short answer, no. I can't tell you why he's a different color and shape in these different minigames, but I can tell you that they're supposed to be the same person. So, let's add everything to our timeline, shall we? Here's the actual last time that we get any real dates. So, what do we have? Well, on Night 5, Phone Guy mentions that due to legal trouble and short staff, they're trying to get in touch with the CEO of the original Freddy's chain, Fredbear's Family Diner. No date is given here, but we know for sure that it existed before 87, so we're just going to place it as the first thing in our timeline. Somewhere before 87, it opens, and then it closes. After that, another location opens. It has to, because that's what the newspapers in FNAF 1 say. A new location opens, and then we have 2 events that, at this point in the series, could go either way. But for right now, I'm going to do it like this. Following Fredbear's, we have the death of the puppet. I'm putting this first right now for a few reasons. We know that the puppet is the one who gave life to the original robots, so based on that, it just makes sense to put the puppet's death first. Then we have the MCI, which gets this new restaurant shut down due to the bad rep and increasingly gross conditions following the murders. So that place gets shut down, and the original robots plus the puppet are shipped off and eventually become part of the roster during FNAF 2. The originals are remodeled in an attempt to fit them with the new technology, but that is quickly abandoned, and the toy animatronics become the main attraction at this new restaurant. If we assume that the newspaper ad shown on night 1 is from today's paper, or, well, whatever day it is in game, then that places the pizzeria's grand opening as November 8th. Then, somewhere during the first week of operations, an employee uses a yellow suit and kills another 5 kids, quickly getting the location shut down. But not before one last tragedy could occur. On November 13th, Jeremy Fitzgerald is bitten by one of the animatronics at this location and loses his frontal lobe, which becomes known as the Bite of 87. This location closes, the toy animatronics are scrapped, and the originals are sent back to the original building for a reopening that happens somewhere between 87 and 93. We know that the FNAF 1 location is both the original and the reopened one because of the newspaper from FNAF 1. It says that it's closing down due to the struggle of the MCI that happened there years ago. That means the MCI happened at this location, but since that was before FNAF 2, it means the original robots were moved from here to the FNAF 2 building, then back here. Anyways, Phone Guy dies on November 4th of 93, and we get fired from that location on November 14th. Then, by the end of 1993, the restaurant closes its doors again. So far, the timeline is still pretty easy to follow. There isn't anything contradictory, and everything lines up really well. The only questions at this point are, who is the killer? Some believed it to be the phone guy, based on the item in his hand during Save Them, but that's inconsistent with what we've been told so far. Phone guy dies in FNAF 1, and by that time, the culprit of the MCI has already been arrested. So, the biggest question at this point is, who is the purple guy? Otherwise, as of FNAF 2, the timeline is still easy to follow.
The problem with spending 2 months making this video is that I now have to do damage control for the FNAF 2 movie. I've been seeing a lot of big name theorists and just the general community taking the wrong aspects of the film as confirmation for what the story of FNAF 2 is. The two biggest points of contention in this game are the Wizards and the 5 bodies in the Save Them minigame. Initially, I chose to ignore this because I felt that they were pretty clearly answered, but the FNAF 2 movie came along and made my life harder. So, what exactly is debated about these two things? There's a very big debate about the Wizards and whether they are the same as the classics. Mostly, this debate is because of how clearly different their designs are compared to the classic suits. This has sparked multiple theories about the way the suits have progressed. Some people think that the characters began as the Withered designs, then got redesigned into the classics. Some people believe that they started as the classics, then were redesigned into the Wizards, and then switched back to the classics for the FNAF 1 location. And then, the best one of all, is that there are now people who believe that the Wizards and the classics aren't the same at all. As for the debate around Save Them, it's the entire premise that these are 5 new dead kids specific to the 87 Fazbear restaurant. Obviously, throughout these games, there's a lot of focus placed on the MCI, their names, their souls being set free, etc. So, that makes it quite weird if Scott spends so much time focusing on those 5 victims, and then proceeds to ignore the 5 children killed at the FNAF 2 restaurant. So, since they never get brought up again, that brings up 2 questions. If they're not dead bodies, what are they? And, are the toys possessed? Well, according to the FNAF 2 movies, no, they're not possessed. Nobody is, aside from the puppet. The takeaway from this has been catastrophic to the community, because people are unable to separate these 2 continuities. I'm going to break down these 2 points to explain why I'm sticking to my original decision, and why I think these theories don't really hold up. In the FNAF 2 movie, the restaurant with the toys and the Wizards is actually the first Fazbear location, and this is where the puppet gets possessed. Then, because of her death, The restaurant ends up closing down, and eventually the FNAF 1 place opens up, and that's where the MCI happens. So, because of this, in the movie continuity, the Withered and FNAF 1 animatronics are completely separate. In fact, the Withereds are just prototypes. Okay, sure, but why doesn't this apply to the FNAF 2 game? Well, that's because we actually know a lot about how the events played out in the games. We know that the toys are headlining a grand reopening. This isn't the first Fazbear restaurant. That's inconsistency number 1. Next up, the puppet doesn't get possessed here. We know that from the Take Cake minigame, as well as a minigame from Pizza Sim. Inconsistency number 2. Now, we also know that the puppet helps guide the souls into the animatronics, which doesn't happen at all in the movie because the puppet is confined to the FNAF 2 building, while the MCI happened at the FNAF 1 building. Inconsistency number 3. Plus, we have the phone calls and Night 6 newspaper to tell us that the Withereds are the OG animatronics. On Night 2, Phone Guy says,
By now I'm sure you've noticed the older models sitting in the back room. Those are from the previous location, and we just use them for parts now. The idea at first was to repair them. They even started retrofitting them with some of the newer technology, but they were just so ugly, and the smell.
They're from the previous location, and they have a putrid smell. The same things mentioned in the FNAF 1 newspaper clippings about the state of the robots following the MCI. These are the original robots, retrofitted with new tech before being scrapped. Then, when the restaurant closes, the Withereds are shipped off back to the FNAF 1 location, and they become the main attraction. This is information that is very clearly given to us. As for the bodies in the Save Them minigame, since we know for a fact the Withereds are possessed by the MCI, the bodies around the building can't be the MCI souls, because we control Withered Freddy, one of the MCI victims. So, disregard the FNAF 2 movie as something that solves the FNAF 2 lore, because it doesn't. It's telling its own story. Leave it that way.
This game is also quite easy to place in the timeline, because the description says that it's 30 years after FNAF 1. Quick and easy. We're in 2023. The story is also split into 2 segments, the A plot during the nights and the B plot during the post-night minigames. There are 2 separate time periods, so I'll start with the minigames since they're chronologically first. Every night, you take control of one of the original animatronics at the FNAF 1 location. If you explore the map, you'll see that the layout is actually the exact same. Each night, the animatronics are lured to the back rooms by Shadow Freddy, and then dismantled by Purple Guy. Wash, rinse, repeat, until night 5 when you take control of a spirit. Now, all the spirits take the form of the ghost with the tear streaks. Anyway, you go to that back room and corner Purple Guy until he puts on a yellow suit, but the spring locks fail and crush him, trapping him inside the suit forever. Now, whoa, I'm getting ahead of myself. What the fuck are spring locks? Well, you get that information from the knights themselves. As you work the nights, you're hunted down by Springtrap, the remainder of Purple Guy after his 30 plus years being trapped in the suit. Meanwhile, you're listening to training tapes from an older Freddy's restaurant, where the phone guy trains employees on how to operate spring-lock suits. These are suits that operate both as animatronic shells, as well as wearable costumes for human operation. They rely on spring locks to hold all the mechanics back and give you space to crawl in. However, if the spring locks loosen, then... So, after an unspecified accident with a spring lock suit, they get recalled, but Purple Guy has taken a special liking to this yellow rabbit suit and decides to keep using it. Phone Guy mentions that the suit keeps moving and urges whoever is using it to stop, but he doesn't. This now puts more pieces together, but also leads us to what I think are 2 retcons. One definitely is, the other might not be. So, based on what the game is showing us, it becomes painfully obvious that Purple Guy was never actually arrested for any of the murders. He literally couldn't be. He killed 6 kids before FNAF 2, 5 more kids during FNAF 2, and then gets springlocked in the FNAF 1 location, placing these minigames in 1993 at the latest. Then, there's 30 years where he's trapped until the idiots at Fazbear's Fright pull him out of the safe room and bring him into the attraction to fuck with you. So, here's our first official retcon. Purple Guy was never caught. The other one I was talking about is the Spring Bonnie suit. Upon looking at everything the last 2 games present, it seems like Scott originally intended Golden Freddy to be the suit that Purple Guy used. It was the only animatronic suit that was empty, no endoskeleton, no ability to move unless someone decided to use it themselves. Plus, on night 6 of FNAF 2, Phone Guy mentions that the killer used a yellow suit, and that is the first time that Golden Freddy becomes active. But come FNAF 3, the killer is using a yellow rabbit suit. It's not a big deal, just something that could be considered a retcon. Anyways, if you do everything the normal way and get all this lore, you're greeted with a screen showing the heads of the main animatronics with lights in their eyes, accompanied with the text, "Bad ending." So, how do you get the good ending? Well, you do a bunch of random shit. Double-click a Balloon Boy poster and jump through a wall to collect a rainbow balloon. You click 4 buttons on an arcade machine in a specific order. Type in a code on the fucking wall. It's wild. But anyways, all of these minigames are to set up a birthday party in the final minigame, Happiest Day. As far as I know, the only thing that's lore relevant at all is the Night 4 minigame, Stage 1. This shows Fredbear and Spring Bonnie performing together, revealing that these are the 2 original mascots of Fredbear's Family Diner, which means Fredbear is also a Springlock suit. Anyways, Happiest Day depicts a birthday party where 4 kids watch as our character gives a cake to the birthday boy on the far right. After that, everybody puts on a character mask. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, the puppet, and the birthday boy is Golden Freddy. After this, the children all disappear, and the masks fall to the ground, leading to the good ending where the lights are off in all of the masks, symbolizing the souls having been set free. Then, if you beat Nightmare Mode, you see that Fazbear's Fright has burned to the ground, but Springtrap survived the fire. Wow, who could have seen this coming? It's almost like there are still 20 more games and books to cover. So, realistically, this game doesn't change much of what we have on the timeline, it just adds stuff about Springlock suits and Purple Guy's fate. So, we still have Fredbear's First, with the inclusion of Springlock suits being used so that the animatronics can be piloted by endos and humans. At some point before the MCI, the Springlock suits were decommissioned due to safety concerns. I initially thought that this would be before the first Freddy's joint opened, because if they were still using the Springlocks, then all of the animatronics would be Springlock suits, but I was being stupid. The FNAF 3 phone calls directly say,
Hello. Welcome to your new career as a performer/entertainer for Freddy Fazbear's Pizza.
Which means that the Springlock suits were still being used when this location opened. So, this new restaurant opens, and soon after, Purple Guy kills a kid who was locked outside. This kid goes on to possess the puppet. Then, the Springlock suits get decommissioned. This explains why Spring Bonnie and Golden Freddy are spare suits in the back. Purple Guy uses Spring Bonnie, and Golden Freddy just lays around with no endoskeleton or person to pilot him, hence the slumped position. Truthfully, the Springlocks could get decommissioned before the puppet is killed, but I'm just gonna say it happens after. Really though, it could go either way. Anyways, the MCI happens, and we know the rest, until FNAF 1. I'm fairly certain, with evidence from these first 3 games alone, that Purple Guy gets Springlocked before FNAF 1. It may seem illogical, because the state of the building is terrible, and everything's boarded up and leaky, and the Purple Guy destroys the animatronics, but hear me out. Thanks to it being one of the only games that we have concrete dates for, we know exactly when it happened, and we know when that pizzeria closed. November 1993 or December at the latest. Since we know this information, it's unlikely that all of this damage happened within a month. But there's other evidence. The safe rooms. The Phone Guy tapes also talk about employee safe rooms alongside the Springlock suits. There are rooms where equipment is stored, and employees are encouraged to go there if they happen to suffer any spring lock failures. The thing is, during the Night 6 phone call, Phone Guy mentions that any safe rooms that exist across all locations are being sealed off, and will have fake walls installed so they are inaccessible. He also urges people not to mention the safe rooms to anybody anymore. Seeing as the post-night minigames show the safe room with no fake wall, it means that they were sealed after this incident, and since it isn't brought up in FNAF 1, it takes place after the room was sealed. That places Purple Guy's death before the FNAF 1 location reopens, meaning it's in between FNAF 2 closing and FNAF 1 opening. Then, everything from FNAF 1 happens. It closes in 93, and 30 years later, we have the events of FNAF 3. The souls are set free, Purple Guy is moved out of the safe room, and then Fazbear's Fright burns. Springtrap is shown to have survived though. This one took a little more effort to piece things together, but it generally still is coherent. Although we did have at least one confirmed retcon, there is no denying that here. Scott said that his one retcon was seamless and never noticed, but this has been pointed out multiple times, so I don't know, that kinda points towards there being more than one retcon. The only other thing I can think of that would work seamlessly and nobody noticed would be the inclusion of Spring Bonnie. But that did get noticed, so I don't know.
So, FNAF 4 is the first game in the series that you can concretely say was not planned. Scott himself admitted in an interview with Doko that this game only exists because people didn't like the jump scares in FNAF 3.
Even though I may have, in some, alternate life, may have left the series alone at 3, people were not happy with the jump scare. And it's kind of as simple as that.
So that leads to the first game with genuinely confusing lore. Once again, this game splits its gameplay between different segments, this time having 3 different types of gameplay. There's the main gameplay, in which you are a kid in a bedroom running back and forth fending off the nightmare animatronics. There's the in-between night bonus rounds, where you flash your light periodically at Plushtrap and hope you catch him on this X, cause it starts the night at 2 AM. Then there are the post-night minigames, like in FNAF 3. These minigames are the main source of story in this game. Each night, you follow a crying child through the week leading up to his birthday party. You get to see his life as he's bullied by his brother, his neighbors, and you get to see his unrelenting fear of the animatronics. When you start a new game, you get the first one, where you're locked in your room and just collapse and cry. After beating night 1, you get to explore the house, which comes with some lore reveals. You can find an empty girl's room, revealing that your character has a sister. There's a broken Mangle toy on the ground, implying the existence of the toy animatronics as well. Then, if you walk towards the TV, you get jump scared by your older brother. Night 2's minigame puts you inside a Fazbear establishment. You try to leave, but a man in a Fredbear suit blocks the door, and you collapse crying in the restaurant. Then, Night 3 lets you leave and walk home before getting jump scared again by your brother. Night 4 sees you being trapped inside a utility closet at Fredbear's, and Night 5 is where shit hits the fan. At his birthday party, the crying child is once again tormented by his brother. Him and some friends pick him up and put him inside Fredbear's mouth. However, the pressure of the animatronic shell is just too much for the kid, and it crushes his head. Now, I'm sure the question nobody is asking is, was that the bite of 87? Well, everything leading up to the game's release certainly wants you to think so. See, I haven't really brought up the pre-release information for any of these games because they haven't really mattered timeline-wise, but now we get to the point where Scott actually started incorporating them into the story. When FNAF 4 was first being teased, Scott revealed the animatronics through a series of teasers. Starting with Bonnie's teaser, the images started asking a question. Was it me? Through every character reveal, they all asked about something that they might have done.
Along with this, the source code of the website was littered with 8s and 7s, leading people to believe that this game, like FNAF 2, would take place in 1987, and the teasers were talking about the bite of 87. But then, in the post-night minigames, the TV would run a show called Fazbear and Friends, which was dated as 1983. 87 would line up with the toy animatronics, which would explain the toys this little girl had, notably having a Chica toy with a detachable beak, as well as the fact that Mangle exists. But then, that would contradict FNAF 2's story. Everything FNAF 2 was saying would make no sense if there was another pizzeria running at the same time, with Fredbear and Spring Bonnie at the forefront. Why would they need to contact the owner of Fredbear's Family Diner if there was another restaurant going on concurrently? And especially, why would the FNAF 2 restaurant have the Spring Bonnie suit if there's currently a restaurant using said mascot? But picking 1983 is also weird, cause then why are all these details here? Why is there a Mangle toy and a Chica missing her beak when the toys haven't been made yet? Breaking chronological order here, I genuinely don't have an answer for this. I was gonna chalk it up to sister location and the fun times, but based on my understanding of the story, they don't exist yet. There's also the fact that Scott said only Nightmare Balloon Boy was canon during the Halloween update. That means the puppet and Mangle are both non-canon at this point in time, which is a very odd detail to point out, but confirms that the bite happens before 87. Now, there used to be an explanation for all these inconsistencies, but it wasn't a good one, and it definitely isn't correct at all. That explanation was Dream Theory. Just after the game came out, a theory started floating around that the entire series was the creation of the crying child after he got bit. He was already terrified of the animatronics, there's dialogue about people getting stuffed in suits, he sees an employee getting suited up as Spring Bonnie, he sees a set of toys where Chica's beak fell off, and once he was bit, his mind conjured up a series of events based on his worst fears of the company and its mascots. Now, on top of being a terrible storytelling device, it also isn't true, because the franchise moved in a completely different direction following this, and Dream Theory died off. Even Scott has come out and criticized the theory. He responded to a now deleted Reddit post that said Dream Theory should die with, "I know, right? Who came up with that anyway?" So, Dream Theory isn't and never was true. What does this mean for the lore? Well, FNAF 4 is undoubtedly taking place in 1983, further confirmed by sister location, but honestly, all the proof we need is in this game and the Halloween update. When you beat Night 6, you get another minigame, this time showing the death of the crying child following the bite. He gets one last message from his Fredbear plush promising to put him back together before the kid flatlines. Now, here's where there's more confusion. Throughout the game, the story is given to you through these dialogue boxes, which are color-coded to each character. The crying child has white text, the Fredbear plush is this shade of yellow, and the brother who's bullying you is gray, etc. After beating Night 6, the first dialogue box you see shares a text color with the older brother, so you can tell that he's the one saying it, even though he isn't on screen. But then, what seems to be Fredbear starts talking to you. However, the text color doesn't actually match the previous interactions. It's lighter than on previous nights. I have an answer for this, and since it doesn't really come up on any subsequent games, I'll just say it here. I think it's the brother speaking through Fredbear rather than whoever was talking before it. This doesn't actually end up becoming a real plot point, so I don't think it matters to break chronological order to tell you here. Anyways, beating Night 7 puts you face to face with this fuck-ass box. Now, a better theorist would try to provide an answer for it. Me? Fuck that shit. I'm not here for that. Throw it far away. I'm not interested. Now, there's also the question of the gameplay. Normally, I wouldn't bring it up, but this time, the gameplay is actually relevant to the topic of the video. Based on all the info from the teasers, the designs of the robots, the names of the robots, the injury the kid gets, and the fact that these creatures are in your house,
It all points to the night sections being the nightmares of a scared kid on his deathbed, further suggested by Easter eggs that show pill bottles, IV stands, and flowers on the nightstand next to the bed. Anyways, with that said, we can wrap up the section on this game. It still leaves us with a relatively intact timeline, give or take some chronologically inconsistent appearances. We still start with Fredbear's Family Diner, which is seemingly where this game takes place. Who knows when it opens, but it's still running till at least 1983. During that year, the crying child is placed into Fredbear's mouth by his brother, where he is bitten, and dies in his hospital bed sometime after that. This would come to be known as the Bite of 83. Then, a new Freddy's chain opens, and at said restaurant, Purple Guy kills a kid who got trapped outside the restaurant. Then, the Springlock suits get decommissioned, but the Purple Guy doesn't care. He takes the Spring Bonnie suit and lures 5 kids to a back room and kills them, which is the MCI. The bad press and worsening upkeep of the robots gets the place shut down. Then in 1987 comes a grand reopening. The originals are scrapped and the toy animatronics headline this new joint. These guys are brand new and technologically advanced, just don't pay attention to the fact that they somehow existed 4 years before they were made. During the week this restaurant was open, our Purple Guy, now an employee at this location, uses the Spring Bonnie suit again to kill 5 more kids. This makes the toy animatronics malfunction and act aggressively towards adults and staff members. This leads to one of them biting Jeremy Fitzgerald on the final day of operations, an event that would come to be known as the Bite of 87. This place closes, the originals are sent back to the FNAF 1 location, where they would eventually reopen, but not before the Purple Guy started messing around with things. During the preparations, he snuck into the building and took apart the animatronics. This allowed the Souls to corner him. In an attempt to regain control, he dons the Spring Bonnie suit, but the poor conditions of the abandoned building result in the spring lock snapping, trapping the killer in a torture chamber of his own design. The safe rooms are sealed off, and that's where the Purple Guy stays for over 30 years. During that time, the restaurant reopens. FNAF 1 happens, it closes again in 1993, and 30 years after that, Springtrap is freed and released into Fazbear's Fright. The horror attraction burns down, but Springtrap survives. It's getting a bit more confusing now, especially with designs that shouldn't exist, gameplay that will eventually be retconned, and design choices that make it very confusing to pinpoint exactly who is speaking at pivotal moments of the story. But at least the timeline is still pretty straightforward, and we can tell that it is still one linear chain of events.
Here we go, we've reached the first book. I actually was wrong in my first retrospective video. When I was talking about FNAF World, I said that Scott started teasing this book in between FNAF World's release and the Halloween update. I was actually wrong about that. While factually he did start teasing the book, Sister Location, and the Halloween update relatively close together, the Silver Eyes actually came out before FNAF World was released. My bad. Now, the book brings in a lot of discourse about what should be taken as fact for the story as a whole, versus what is there just to tell a good story. When this book came out, a lot of people were up in arms about its canonicity, especially considering that it has its own set of contradictions, such as the fact that Michael Brooks, one of the victims of the MCI, was said to have been taken by Golden Freddy, and is eventually revealed to be the one possessing him. Now, this would have fit if the book came out before FNAF 3, but knowing what we know, Scott going out of his way to throw in Spring Bonnie just to release a book that says the Golden Freddy suit was the one used for the MCI? Wild. Anyways, the confusion and drama led Scott to clarify on a Steam community post, saying, "Something I should have explained very early on is that the book is not intended to solve anything. It's not intended to be a guide for the games or to fill in gaps. The games are what they are, and that story is finished." Whoops. Sometimes the lore of something can become so crowded that you can't tell an original story anymore. The games and books should be considered to be separate continuities, even if they do share many familiar elements. So yes, the book is canon, just as the games are. That doesn't mean they are intended to fit together like two puzzle pieces. This then sparked the age-old debate that still happens to this day. Are the books parallels? What Scott says here seems to suggest that we shouldn't be using the books at all to get any information for the games. But as we know all too well, as the series continued, the games started borrowing a lot more concepts from the books. So, people started looking at the books to fill in gaps, which Scott himself said not to do, but he gave up on that. So I'm going to use the books to fill in gaps. The book has some major overlaps and some things that are completely disconnected. Michael Brooks and Golden Freddy? Completely disconnected, but it still gives some useful information. It tells us that the MCI happened in 1985. That's when Michael died, the main cast left town that year, and the book picks up 10 years later. The main character of the book is Charlie, the daughter of one of the owners of Freddy's, a guy named Henry Emily. Henry was in charge of the robotics end of the company, while his business partner, William Afton, took care of business. Now, quite a bit is revealed about these two, and it fills in a lot of gaps about stuff in the books and in the games. When Afton is first revealed, he's hiding out in the remains of Freddy's as a security guard named Dave. Charlie takes note of how frail he looks and the immense scarring he has around his neck. Later on, Dave drops the act and dons the Spring Bonnie suit, revealing himself as Afton. This gives us a real name to our purple guy. The man going around killing everybody is William Afton, the co-owner of Fazbear Entertainment. Afton is also well aware of the fact that the animatronics are possessed, and in this book, the animatronics see Spring Bonnie as one of them, which is why Afton is able to control them against the main cast throughout the story. Afton was the prime suspect of the MCI, but due to a lack of evidence, he was never charged with anything, and out of grief due to this, Henry builds a robot to kill himself and leaves Charlie with her aunt, who takes her out of town in July of 1985. Then, at the end of the book, during the climax, Charlie activates the spring locks in Afton's suit and leaves him to die as the suit crushes him. So, this allows us to fill in some stuff in the game timeline, although it doesn't really change anything aside from giving us firmer dates and names. It still goes Fredbear's Family Diner, to the Bite of 83, to the decommissioned Springlock suits, but now we can say that the Freddy's restaurant here was open until either late 85 or 86 at the latest. Now, we can't put a specific date for the puppet's murder, as we don't concretely know when this location opened, nor when the kid was killed. However, we do now know that the MCI happened on June 26, 1985, and that William Afton is the culprit behind everything that has and will happen. So, fast forward through FNAF 2, William kills more kids likely to experiment with the possessions, yada yada, Bite of 87, now we're at the spring locking. Afton takes apart the original animatronics and unwillingly separates their souls from the suits, which allows them to corner him, and in an attempt to regain control, he dons the Spring Bonnie suit. But instead of things going his way, he gets crushed and left to rot. If him being the killer wasn't enough proof, the fact that Afton gets spring-locked in the book and the games tells us that he is the one inside of Springtrap. So, for a part of the series that causes everyone so much grief, the Silver Eyes is actually quite helpful. You get to know the name of the villain, and you get quite a lot of info regarding dates and who created the robots and restaurants. I can't complain about this one. It really helps, and I'm so glad that I finally get to refer to some characters with actual names. FNAF World has very little bearing on the actual storyline outside of one key thing: its secret ending. Upon booting the game for the first time, you get a cutscene of two eyes speaking to you. It's a bit of setup for the game, but it ends with the line, "I will put you back together." So, you start the actual game, and you see Fredbear giving you instructions, but if you wait on the final dialogue box instead of hitting done, the game glitches and you get more instructions. Every time you do this, a clock spawns, and interacting with said clock takes you to a black and white minigame where you set up one of the good ending minigames from FNAF 3. push Balloon Boy into his box, press the arcade buttons in the order they were pushed in FNAF 3, push 4 cupcakes into boxes, select 395248 because that was the wall code, and yada yada. Once you've done that, a previously blocked off area opens up and you can access this ending, where you get another message from these glowing eyes. We are still your friends. Do you believe that? The pieces are in place for you, all you have to do is find them. So this does two things lore-wise. Firstly, based on the dialogue from the beginning and the ending, it connects FNAF World to the crying child. I will put you back together is unmistakable, but the ending also shares "We are still your friends. Do you believe that?" with the ending of FNAF 4, almost word for word. It also connects the crying child to the Happiest Day minigame. Since we're sent on a quest to create the conditions for Happiest Day, and whoever this is directs it to the crying child, it becomes increasingly obvious that we were creating the crying child's Happiest Day. And it makes sense too, the crying child was bitten at his own birthday party, and everything you do in FNAF 3 revolves around giving cake to various children. Hell, the Happiest Day minigame shows a birthday party with what seemed to be the 5 missing children. But wait, if the Happiest Day is for the crying child, then where's the 5th kid? Thus begins the era where every answer creates its own new question. You get so much information that makes sense, but then you think about it, and it starts to crack. This is genuinely one of the main reasons why the lore is so hard to solve. Even if all the information points to one clear answer, there is always some detail that can break your belief in the theory. Now, to be completely honest, I think this is a retcon. We know FNAF 4 was made solely to please the fans because of the lackluster jump scares in 3. So the entire story was added on after the fact, which essentially makes the entirety of FNAF 4 a retcon. But whatever. Looking at it now, the thing is that Happiest Day was originally meant to be the actual end of the series. The puppet sets up a birthday party for the missing children victims, their souls pass on, and all of the animatronics are put to rest. That's the visual of the ending screen, and that's why even the puppet fades away here. But now, the meaning has changed. The party was for the crying child, and the crying child is Golden Freddy. But now, the 5th MCI victim is entirely absent. In a series where numbers absolutely matter, a retcon like this is kinda frustrating. However, I also think this is the retcon Scott was talking about in his Reddit post. I personally have never seen anybody talk about this, and I've also never seen anyone bring up the 5th missing kid when claiming that Happiest Day is for the crying child. So, in the public's perspective, Scott made 2 more games that clarified who the Happiest Day was for, when in reality, he retconned who it was for, and people just took that as him clarifying. That's why it slipped under the radar, why it quote-unquote fit seamlessly, and why people have such a hard time placing where this retcon is. It's so widely accepted now that it seems like it was the original intention. But that's just my 2 cents. Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? This is where we get our first confirmation that we are actually allowed to use the books to inform what's going on in the games. Upon launching the game, you get a cutscene showing off Baby, and in the background, someone is inquiring about design aspects of the animatronics. The creator talks about her capabilities of singing, dancing, dispensing balloons, and ice cream. However, whoever was asking the questions says,
"With all due respect, those aren't the design choices we were curious about, Mr. Afton."
Mr. Afton. 2 things of note here. One is that we get our first real overlap between what the books told us and what the games are telling us, and 2, this implies that Afton is the one who made this set of robots, despite the fact that he is usually in charge of the business side of the franchise. Anyways, I think this game is the most story-heavy so far, and it actually is one of the games that goes out of its way to put a lot of pieces together, although it always comes with some other issues. Before the game came out, Scott was posting his usual images to tease the game. Blah blah blah, general teasers, wait a sec. Cancelled due to leaks? It's a cheeky tease from Scott, because at the time, people were reporting on a lot of leaks about this game, so at a first glance, Scott was cancelling the game. However, hidden in the black space of this image was a news report. In other news, the grand opening of Circus Baby's Pizza World has apparently been cancelled due to reported gas leaks in the building. For the first time, Scott was including actual lore in his teasers. At some point before the events of the game, these robots were meant to headline their own restaurant, but an apparent gas leak led to the project being shut down on its opening day, and they were retired into this bunker to become rentals. Then, the Five Nights go on to actually tell a story during the main gameplay. Throughout the nights, you play as someone heading down into a bunker holding the Funtime animatronics, cause you're doing maintenance, making sure they're in working condition to be rented out, blah blah blah. Throughout the nights, you're introduced to Circus Baby, and you start to build a sort of relationship with her. She gives you tips on what to do, and she kinda opens up about things that she's experienced. This all culminates on night 5, when she asks you to take out the good in her and take it to the scooping room. When you get there, it turns out that you've been manipulated, and the animatronics merge into Ennard and use the scooper on you so they can escape the bunker. That's the main story, but there's still a lot to unpack. During night 2, you are tasked with manually restoring power to every section of the bunker. To do this, you have to click and hold a bunch of buttons that correspond to different areas on the map. There are a few points on this map that look a little familiar. Observation 1 and 2 are both clearly the FNAF 4 house. This corridor with 2 rooms on each side is the plush trap hallway, and this rectangle here is the exact same map that you get when you use the house map cheat in FNAF 4. But then, weirder than that, this area on the map has the exact same layout as the map from the Night 3 minigame. This would be the restaurant, the outdoor path, and this is the exact layout of the house. The TV room, the middle room, the sister's room, and the crying child's bedroom. This puts our conclusions about FNAF 4 into question. We initially assumed that everything was pointing to the gameplay being the nightmares of the crying child, but in that case, why are these areas being observed? Are they part of the bunker? Were the nightmares real? Well, if you want to know, fuck you, you don't get to find out yet, because there aren't any answers revealed in this game. Anyways, there's still more to this game. When you start a new night, you get a voice line from a little girl begging her father to let her see Circus Baby. If you pay attention to these, you actually find out that she's Afton's daughter, because she says,
"Daddy just once let me go play with her. She's so pretty and shiny. Didn't you make her just for me?"
In her last voice line, she decides to sneak away while nobody's watching, a decision which would get her killed. We know this based on 2 other things that the game tells us. Like FNAF 2, this game has a death minigame, but only one. On some occasions, dying will queue up a game where you play as Baby, going around and giving cupcakes to angry kids. Anyways, there's a very specific way you have to do it to actually get the lore from this minigame. Every kid has to be happy, and in order to do that, you have to do parkour to reach certain areas without losing the cupcakes, because if you pick up the wrong one at the wrong time, you're screwed. So, once you make everyone happy, you go to the end, and there's an ice cream cone. You gotta grab it and book it all the way back to the fucking beginning. Scott gives you just enough time to do it. There is no margin for error. If you make it on time though, you'll place down the ice cream cone and a little girl will come into frame. Once she gets close enough, Baby's chest opens and reveals a claw that grabs the girl and yanks her. If you notice, during the minigame, Baby's eyes are blue and the little girl's eyes are green. But everywhere else, Baby is depicted as having green eyes. This is because the little girl, Afton's daughter, possessed her. Baby also describes this moment as she recounts what happens on the opening day of her restaurant. The article about the gas leak mentions that a group of kids were allowed into the restaurant, and Baby talks about seeing a group of kids. But she also mentions that at one point they all left except for one, and when there was only one, there was a lot of screaming. We know based on these blueprints that were in the game files that the Funtime animatronics were designed with the specific intention of luring and capturing kids. So Afton makes these robots with the sole purpose of killing more children and lies to his daughter about making Baby just for her. Come the grand opening, Afton refuses to let her daughter near Baby because of obvious reasons, but she doesn't listen, and Afton's wonderful designs get his own daughter killed. So, rather than a gas leak getting the building closed, it's presumably this, and the gas leak was just a cover-up. But we're still not done. Remember how I mentioned the fact that the FNAF 4 maps were listed as observations in the bunker? Well, there's another connection to FNAF 4. On night 5, Baby gives you very specific instructions to get to the scooping room. However, if you beat the Baby Cupcake minigame, you actually gain access to a secret room that's opposite the scooping room. Ignoring Baby and booking it there gets you into a classic FNAF sequence, and typing 1983 into this keypad activates the monitors and shows the FNAF 4 bedroom and plush trap hallway. You can also see the Fredbear plush from the minigames on the desk here. So, what does this tell us? Well, this is a very clear connection between FNAF 4 and the Afton family. I mean, why else would a bunker owned by Afton be watching over the house and streets of FNAF 4? It's cause that was Afton's house. Those were Afton's kids. So not only is Baby Afton's daughter, but the bite victim is Afton's son. But we're still not done, cause Scott released a custom night DLC. It's technically not a custom night, you can only play preset challenges, but whatever. Beating the hardest difficulty of each challenge gives you a cutscene. For most of the cutscenes, it just details how the protagonist deteriorates with entered inside of him. He starts off fine, but slowly his skin starts rotting, and his hair and teeth fall out. It's pretty bad. Eventually, he's fully purple, and at that point, Ennard decides to eject themselves, but for some reason, the protagonist doesn't die, and he gets up again. Then, beating the hardest challenge on the hardest difficulty gets you this.
Father, it's me, Michael. I did it. I found it. It was right where you said it would be. They were all there. They didn't recognize me at first, but then they thought I was you. And I found her. I put her back together, just like you asked me to. She's free now. But something is wrong with me. I should be dead, but I'm not. I've been living in shadows. There is only one thing left for me to do now. I'm going to come find you. I'm going to come find you.
Well, 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 our protagonist is Michael Afton. He's also Afton's son. So in the span of one game, we get confirmation that the books overlap with the games, and we get the identities of all 3 of Afton's kids. This was a wild time for lore reveals. The cutscene with Michael's monologue also gives us other plot details. Michael says that he went to the bunker to
put her back together, just like you asked me to.
Which, again, links Afton to the final cutscene of FNAF 4. But Michael ends the monologue with,
I'm going to come find you.
Which is followed by the reveal of Springtrap, implying that Afton was springlocked before the main gameplay of Sister Location. It's generally believed that Michael's mission to find his father is what ties all of the games together. Michael, following him getting freed from Ennard's control, starts going to each of the different locations trying to find Afton, not knowing that he's rotting in a safe room. People also use the pink slips in FNAF 1 and 2 as evidence, seeing as Mike Schmidt got fired for tampering with the animatronics and Odor, and so did Fritz Smith. They also point out that whoever the guard is in FNAF 3 hallucinates animatronics from FNAF 1 and 2, so they would have had to be at both. They like to say that Scott doesn't do coincidences or discrepancies, but we know he does. A lot. Like, a lot. Point is, there are inconsistencies with this, so let's run through the whole timeline again and I'll point them out. Once again, we start with Fredbear's family diner. Then we move on to the bite of 83. Now, you might be thinking, hey, There was an empty girl's room in FNAF 4. Wouldn't that belong to Baby? And if so, wouldn't her death happen first? Fair assumption, but there are a couple flaws with that. Afton, at this point in the timeline, hasn't killed anybody, at least not directly, so what reason would he have to create murder robots immediately after Fredbear's Family Diner? Also, on night 1, Hand Unit says,
"Due to the massive success, and even more so the unfortunate closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, it was clear that the stage was set, no pun intended, for another contender in children's entertainment."
This means that Afton launched Circus Baby's Pizza World, the restaurant, after Freddy's closed, which would place that after the missing children's incident. So, back to the timeline. Fredbear's Bite of 83. Then the first Freddy's chain opens. Afton kills the puppet, then the spring locks are decommissioned, then the missing children's incident. Freddy's 1 closes, and Afton decides that it's time for better things, like killing more kids. He does this through a new business venture, Circus Baby's Pizza World. He makes a new set of robots specifically designed to lure and capture kids so he won't have to, but Baby manages to snag his own daughter, getting the restaurant shut down before it opens. That leaves the fun times to be sent down to the bunker, and they aren't given a second thought until later. Now, after this failure, Freddy's tries to open again, relaunching everything in 1987, with new designs and new tech to avoid the mishaps of the past. Except they completely fail. Afton manages to get a job at this new restaurant, and he uses his access to don the Spring Bonnie suit, again kills another 5 kids. This makes the new animatronics go AWOL, and results in them biting Jeremy Fitzgerald, the Bite of 87. Then, for the last night that the pizzeria is open, Fritz Smith is hired and promptly fired for tampering with the robots. Most people now believe this to be Michael, but it can't be, for the sole reason that Afton has not been spring-locked, so Michael hasn't been to the bunker yet. Michael's entire motivation comes from him being sent to the bunker by Afton, and getting scooped, and becoming a rotting flesh sack. If that hasn't happened, he has no reason to be following his father, so he can't be Fritz Smith. The pink slip is just a coincidence. Anyways, after Freddy's 2 is shut down, the original robots are sent back to the original location and put back together for an eventual reopening. Before this happens, Afton makes his grand return. He sneaks in while the building is in repair and takes apart the animatronics. In doing so, he frees the souls and they corner him, leading to him getting spring-locked and sealed into the safe room. While he's missing, Michael finds himself going to the bunker through some instructions by Afton. I'm personally assuming that this is something set up in case of emergency, like if Afton gets his dumbass spring-locked. Mike goes down to the bunker and gets himself scooped, allowing Ennard to escape the bunker before eventually ejecting itself from Mike and doing their own thing. Mike also manages to survive this somehow, and because of this, he vows to find his father, so he starts where anyone else would, the new Freddy's chain. While all of this was going on, Fazbear Entertainment managed to reopen again, and Mike takes a job at Freddy's 3. Then, we know everything that happens at FNAF 1, and 30 years later, Mike gets a job at Fazbear's Frights. You can chalk up the hallucinations to the fact that Mike would have seen the FNAF 2 location as he was still Afton's son, and the only one left at that point. Mike ends up face to face with his father, and after a week on the job, he burns it down in an attempt to kill his dad. But unfortunately, it doesn't work. So, The Twisted Ones is the second book in the Silver Eyes trilogy, and it does what any other FNAF entry does. It makes things really confusing. There are 3 things that are very notable in this book, one of which is the introduction of a new piece of technology in the FNAF universe. There are little discs that emit frequencies that shift so fast and so unpredictably that it messes with your head and makes you hallucinate shit. They were designed by none other than Afton, and used on robots with blank shells to turn them into these. The second is the reveal that underneath Henry's old house, there's an entire Freddy's restaurant, stocked with balloon boys and other animatronics. The third is a reveal about Charlie's upbringing. Charlie has been going down the rabbit hole of everything relating to Freddy's and Afton because of a faint memory she has of when she was like 3. She remembers being in a back room or closet or something with her brother Sammy. But in this memory, Afton, sporting his designer goods, opens the door and takes Sammy, and he was never seen again. This is like a major driving point in the book. At the end, Charlie comes face to face with Afton again, now sporting a more signature look and donning the name Springtrap. In this confrontation, he admits that he never actually took Sammy. Not at all. He took Charlie all those years ago. And then she gets spring-locked. It's fucked up, but I think it's written quite well. Anyways, these three reveals are very important because they shaped the way people understood the series going forward. I'll start with the Charlie reveal because it's easier. So, it's revealed that one of Afton's earliest kills in the book series was Charlie. And while it's not directly stated that he killed her here, it's not hard to infer. Afton never kidnaps, he always kills. And if he did hold her hostage, wouldn't she remember that? Instead, she has memories of something that never happened, which hints towards a reveal that comes in the next book. But the biggest takeaway is that Charlie is one of Afton's earliest victims, a 3-year-old girl who was taken out of sight from everyone because she wasn't in the main area. If we're using the books to fill in pieces for the games, this implies that Afton's first kill is always Charlie, meaning that Charlie is the kid who becomes the puppet. This would technically be a retcon. If you remember, the FNAF 2 minigame depicting this event had a voice in the background saying, "Save him." If Charlie is the one who becomes the puppet, then Scott retconned the gender of the kid. Then, there are the other two, which makes my life more difficult. They both contribute to the same problem, and that is the question of what the fuck is going on with FNAF 4. So, I kinda skimmed over it when looking at Sister Location, but the fact is that there's a lot more implications to Afton's observation rooms than I mentioned, and that's further evidenced through the book. Starting with the illusion discs, the way the animatronics are described in this book give off the impression that the twisted ones are really the fun times, with the illusion discs being used to give them the twisted appearance. This gave people the idea that the nightmare animatronics were a result of illusion discs. This is further evidenced by the fact that the FNAF 4 house is directly connected to the bunker in Sister Location. If we use this book for evidence, it implies that the FNAF 4 house is like right on top of the bunker. Coupled with the idea that the nightmare robots were real, this completely changes our understanding of FNAF 4's gameplay loop. The theory at this point was that Afton was testing the illusion discs on his own son, in his own house. But there's something else to be aware of. There are 2 FNAF 4 houses. One of them is seen in the minigames, which consists of 4 rooms: the TV room, middle room, sister's room, and the crying child's room. Then, during the gameplay, there's a different house map with a kitchen, middle area, and 2 hallways that lead to the bedroom. On the Sister Location power grid, both houses are visible in different areas. This sparked a new theory. The FNAF 4 bedroom and the plush trap hallway were both part of the bunker itself, and the crying child was just placed there, again, to test the illusion discs. Now, I'm not presenting this to say that it's true. I'm just presenting the evidence that leads people to these conclusions. At this point in the series, if Scott intended for this to be the explanation of FNAF 4, then it's another retcon, but I'm not gonna count it just yet. FNAF 4 was obviously intended to be the nightmares of the bite victim, so any other explanation is a retcon. It also just doesn't fit into the timeline, because the fun times wouldn't exist before the crying child died. So, fuck this shit, but those are the main implications that came out of the second novel. Pizza Sim is the game that everybody says has the clearest lore in the franchise. They're wrong though, that's FNAF 1 to 3, but I can see why they think that. Pizza Sim does go out of its way to wrap things up. It covers a lot of loose ends and provides a real conclusion to the series, for the 3rd time. It also now marks the point where we have passed the time frame of when Scott said there was only one retcon. Remember, he said that a few months before this game came out, so that means, at the time of making that post, there were at least 5 retcons. Moving on though, the reason I don't think Pizza Sim has the clearest lore is because, aside from certain aspects, the game is your average FNAF game. It raises just as many questions as it answers. As much as it tries to be a bookend for the series, it still leaves questions that are unanswered to this day. The main gist of the game is that you bought the rights to a Fazbear franchise and are in complete control over the layout, attractions, animatronics, etc. You have 4 catalogs that range from the broke-ass cardboard shit to the high-end expensive shit, like these state-of-the-art pickles. Then, every night, you have to sort out tasks from your retro computer while shit crawls at you through the vents on either side. Now, on top of that, you're also responsible for checking the back alley for any junk that fits the criteria of essentially just being possessed. This is where you find your loose ends, Afton, Baby, Molten Freddy, and Lefty, and you bring them inside to make your life a lot harder. When you bring them in, there's a cassette tape where a man gives you instructions about what to do with the animatronic you got. Now, you may be wondering why Baby exists again, and that is revealed through 2 websites that Scott had running at the same time, pretty much. See, remember when the Silver Eyes came out, and I said that Scott was teasing that, FNAF World, and Sister Location around the same time? Well, because of how many teasers there were, Scott made a second website specifically for FNAF World. Then, around the time he was teasing Pizza Sim, he edited the source code on both websites to form a conversation. On one end was Baby, and the other was the rest of Ennard. They had an argument, and Ennard decided to separate themselves from Baby, hence why they're separate here. Then there's Lefty, who doesn't seem to be a loose end at first glance. However, there are 2 things in this game that reveal otherwise. On rare occasions, there are Easter eggs you can get of one of the scrap animatronics in the back alley before you grab them. If you see Lefty's, you can notice that within his animatronic shell, there's the puppet's striped arm, as well as her face to the right in a reflection. Along with this, one of the endings in the game reveals that Lefty is an acronym, standing for Lure, Encapsulate, Fuse, Transport, and Extract. So, it's a cage meant to lure and capture the puppet so that she's also present. Present for what? Well, we'll get there. First, I want to talk a bit more background. Like I mentioned, there are multiple endings. 6, in fact. I'm only going to be talking about 2, those being the Lorekeeper ending and Insanity ending. I'm going to start with the Insanity. To get this one, you have to buy the Egg Baby Data Archive, which will turn the power button on your monitor from green to blue. If you turn off the monitor, click and hold the power button and turn it back on, it queues up a file from a data archive entitled HRY223. While I don't particularly agree that it's conclusive, people generally think that HRY stands for Henry. I do believe that it's Henry, I just don't agree with the HRY thing. I think that would say Harry more than Henry, but whatever. The file has a lot of lore info, as well as dialogue from the cassette man which basically confirms that he's Henry. He talks about what Afton has done, says that the souls are trapped in a prison that he unwittingly helped create. Along with this, you see blueprints of different things, most notably the scooper from Sister Location. It goes into more detail about the process of possessions, specifically through something called Remnant. It's not fully explained in the games, but essentially, Remnant is possessed metal. The scooper has a reservoir of Remnant within it, and every time it's used, it injects some of that into whatever it's used on, which is why Michael survived his time with Ennard. Anyways, keep this metal reservoir in mind, because I'm going to come back to it. The last thing of note on this blueprint is that Remnant fades with high temperatures. Then you get lobotomized. I wanted to go over this ending first, because it gives us context for the main ending. Henry's grappling with the consequences of Afton's actions, and he's putting together a plan to put an end to all of it, and we see that happen if we salvage all 4 of the animatronics. Beating the last night leads to a cutscene where Henry sets the place ablaze, and you get to watch as every lingering spirit is put to rest once and for all. Henry has a badass speech where he lays everything out in the open. It starts off with him giving us the name of Afton's daughter.
Connection terminated. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Elizabeth. If you still even remember that name.
Which is great, another name that I can use instead of calling her Baby or Afton's daughter. You get to see the animatronics in flames as Henry talks about them finding peace before condemning Afton to hell.
For most of you, I believe there is peace, and perhaps more, waiting for you after the smoke clears. Although for one of you, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole. So don't keep the devil waiting, old friend.
Then, the focus shifts to his daughter, outright confirming that Charlie is the puppet, and that all of the theories from FNAF 2 were true. It also shows some footage from what would be the Lorekeeper ending, which is the same as this one, but you have to play 3 minigames. In the main ending, when Henry is talking about Charlie, you see the FNAF 2 minigame, followed by 2 stills of a different rendition of the same event. In order to get the full context, you have to buy the security puppet and play it 4 times. The first 3 times, it'll task you with finding a kid wearing a green wristband, but everyone who appears has blue or orange or whatever. Then, on the 4th try, you finally find that green wristband, on Charlie, but she's locked out, and the other kids are laughing at her. There's also a box placed on top of the puppet's box, trapping it. By the time it manages to escape, Charlie has already been killed. It makes its way outside to protect her, but the rain fries its circuits, causing it to collapse right next to her. Then there's Midnight Motorists, a generally uneventful game where you dodge a bunch of cars as you steadily gain speed. But near the end, there's a gap in the walls of the minigame, and going through that gap queues up another minigame. In this, you're an orange guy controlling a purple car. Ramming your car into the border here takes you to what appears to be an unmarked grave, more on that later. As you move down the road, you can pull off to the side again, which brings you to a place called Junior's. It's unclear exactly what this is supposed to be, but there is a bouncer or security guard at the door, this little green guy, who turns you away if you try to enter. Specifically, the person says, "You know you can't be here." Finally, following the road in a straight line takes you to your house, where some weird shit happens. You see someone watching TV who tells you to leave him alone tonight. He's had a rough day. Whoever Mustard Man is doesn't listen, but finds that whoever else lives here locked their door. Going around back reveals a broken window and footsteps leading away from the house. But there's also a bigger footstep near the house, and the fact that there's no broken glass around the house means that the window was broken from the outside. Mustard Man says he's off to that place again, but whoever this is has seemingly been taken. Now, if you're at all familiar with this, you know that to this day, there still isn't a widely accepted explanation for this shit. People can't even agree on who Mustard Man is, who the TV person is, who ran away or got taken. They can't agree on anything. The most common answers are that Mustard Man is Afton and TV Guy is Michael. This conclusion is based off of 2 things mostly. One is Michael's design in FNAF 4. The shirt and skin color of the person watching TV is relatively similar to his design in FNAF 4. There's also the fact that in the game files, this minigame is called Later That Night. This begs the question, later what night? Well, later the night Afton killed Charlie. There are a few similarities. We know from FNAF 2 that Afton pulled up to the crib in a purple car. In this minigame, Mustard Man is driving a purple car. It's also raining when Charlie is killed, and it's raining during this minigame. So, following this line of logic, Mustard Man is Afton. But that doesn't make sense. First off, Afton has been presented as purple in every single one of his appearances. So why now, in the game meant to wrap everything up, would Afton randomly be portrayed as orange? But not only that, if this is Afton, and we believe that this is Michael, then timeline-wise, this can't happen. We know Afton has 3 kids. Michael is the oldest, then there's the crying child, and then Elizabeth. Elizabeth is seemingly the youngest, and Crying Child is seemingly the first death in the franchise, so a male kid running away doesn't make sense since Elizabeth isn't here either. But there's still unanswered questions, like what the animatronic footprint is. Until the salvages, there are only 2 animatronics we know that have been outside a pizzeria. They are Ennard and the twisted ones from the novels. This, alongside the unmarked grave, led people to believe that maybe this was tying the twisted ones into the games. But no. Right now, it's most commonly believed that this grave is an unmarked grave for Elizabeth. But still, it doesn't fit anywhere. If that is a grave for Elizabeth, then the crying child is already dead. That means that the only kid left who could run away is Michael. So then TV Guy isn't Michael. It's confusing, and we still don't have answers for it today, but it's not the only thing that's fucking confusing in this game. The presence of the puppet is something that catches my eye, because Happiest Day implies that she was set free already. Yet for some reason, she's still here! You already know what this means. Anyways, the last game is Fruity Maze, which you have to win twice. The first time is pretty normal. You run around collecting fruits and power-ups. Every so often, a yellow rabbit appears just watching you. When you collect enough fruit, you get a time bonus, and you can see the reflection of a little blonde girl who is playing the game. Beating it once gets you to stage 2, where some of the fruits have been replaced with dead dogs, and the girl is noticeably upset. Beating it again gets you to stage 3, where none of the power-ups work, so you're forced to lose. This time, you're collecting flowers and dog remains, and when your time is up, you can hear a blaring car horn. It paints the picture that this little girl's dog got run over. Upon the end of the game, you get a little cutscene with Afton standing behind the girl, saying that her dog isn't dead and beckoning her to follow him. Evidently, this is showing Afton in the process of luring one of the MCI victims. Doing all this will grant you one extra thing when you do the main ending. A screen with 6 gravestones, 5 in the foreground with 1 in the far back. 4 of them are clear, reading Jeremy, Gabriel, Susie, and Fritz. The 5th one is covered by grass, and the one in the back is very likely Charlie. So we can attribute names to the kids now, and one face. Susie is the only girl's name, so this must be her. Now, the final question of the series, beyond what the fuck was going on in Midnight Motorists, is the final name on the gravestone, and that would be revealed in the Survival Logbook, released just a couple weeks after this game came out. Now, I'd usually put it in its own segment, but I think, given there are only like 3 genuinely big lore reveals that come out of this, I'll just cover it here. The first thing of note is that, lore-wise, this is an employee logbook that Fazbear Entertainment gives out, and the one we got just so happened to be owned by Mike. That's not a coincidence either. We know it's Michael Afton because he writes about exotic butters, relating him back to Sister Location. Now, Michael filled out parts of the logbook, and as we can tell from the name page, he writes in red ink. What's interesting to note is that, on a page specifically talking about dreams, Michael drew Nightmare Fredbear. This is actually huge, because it reveals Michael to be the one experiencing the FNAF 4 gameplay. It also goes back to implying that the FNAF 4 gameplay was all a dream. Now, I'll give Scott the benefit of the doubt here, and not count this as a retcon, because, as Scott says in the Reddit post, when people misunderstand things, he makes a point to clarify it. I think that this is supposed to be that clarification. He's saying that FNAF 4 is still meant to be a dream, and that the theorists were reading too far into things. However, what I do think is a retcon is the fact that Michael was the one having those nightmares. Like I said earlier, I don't think it's a stretch to say that the original intent of FNAF 4 was for the gameplay to be the crying child's nightmares. Everyone was so convinced of that, which is what led MatPat to thinking Michael was the bite victim for a period of time. Moving on, there are still 2 other big takeaways from this book, both of which have to do with Golden Freddy. See, Michael isn't the only one writing in this book. There are actually 3 people. Mike writes in red ink, but on certain pages you can make out faded text, usually asking questions. What do you remember? Is this song familiar to you? Do you have dreams? Etc. Most of these questions go unanswered, but some of them actually do get a response from the 3rd entity. The faded text writes, "What do you see?" on page 59, and on page 109, the other spirit alters the text of the book and says, "I can't see." Call and response. We can see this in other pages too, most notably when the faded text writes, "The party was for you," and on page 89, the other spirit responds, "It was for me." This implies that the 3rd spirit in the book is the crying child. But then, the question is, who's behind the faded text? Well, on multiple pages, the faded text writes out my name. On one of said pages, it's even written on a gravestone that Mike drew in, implying that this spirit is the missing name on the Pizza Sim ending. So, how do we figure out its name? Well, thanks to MatPat and Reddit user DPowerful1, I can present to you the solution that I didn't find. The pages that have my name written on it each have a numerical value, and if it's not directly on that page, there will be something that points to where you need to look. Page 29 is labeled 52, page 32 is labeled 39, page 43 is labeled 15. On page 47, 7 and 2 are listed twice. Page 79 has my name written on it, but no direct hint. But under one of the coupons, Mike writes, "For real value, see page 61. On that page, the chalkboard has 5 plus 4 written on the side, and then 3 written on the other. On page 85, the numbers 10 and 11 are red, and on page 108, Mike filled in the time for an incident report as 8:11. So, we're left with 52, 39, 15, 7, 2, 9, 3, 10, 11, 8, and 11. In the word search, there are a lot more hidden words than the ones listed at the bottom. The most common is "it's me," but along the bottom line, we see that the crying child changed the words to say, "What is your name?" So, plugging these numbers as coordinates into the word search gives you that answer. 5 and 2, 3 and 9, 1 and 5, 7 and 2, 9 and 3, 10, 11, and 8 and 11. Cassidy. So, we have the name of the last MCI victim. All things considered, this is the identity of Golden Freddy. And yeah, I know I said the crying child was Golden Freddy. Both things are true. I'm getting ahead of myself because this didn't become a theory until a few years later, but there are 2 souls in Golden Freddy. But you're not supposed to know that yet, so don't let anyone know I told you. So with that out of the way, we can finally add Pizza Sim to our timeline. You know the drill. Everything's generally the same. We have a little more context for how Charlie became the puppet, and we have names for the MCI kids. In 85, Gabriel, Fritz, Susie, Jeremy, and Cassidy are lured and killed by Afton, and then stuffed into the suits. Cassidy is stuffed into Golden Freddy and joins the crying child. Then, everything plays out exactly as we thought, till Mike's scooping. At some point after ejecting itself, Ennard and Baby start bickering, and they separate, creating Molten Freddy and Scrap Baby. There's really no way to tell when this happened, so I'll just put it right after they eject. I don't know. Mike then goes to the FNAF 1 pizzeria, gets fired, yeah, we know. Fazbear Frights burns down, leaving Afton rummaging around. Sometime after this, Henry steps in. He creates the Rockstars as a front to capture the puppet, and sells a franchise package as a front to lure everyone back once and for all. Mike buys the package and officially launches Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place. Every night, at the instruction of Henry, Mike checks the back alley and brings in Molten Freddy, Baby, Afton, and Lefty. And at the end of the week, it all burns down. Everyone's fucking dead, putting an end to the story once and for all. Around 2023, probably, maybe, I don't know the exact date. This is a hell of a book, because it is probably the wildest thing that Scott did with the lore. So, there are really just a few things worth talking about, one of which, or I guess 2 of which, is the fate of Charlie. See, I didn't really go in depth about the stories of these books, rather, I talked about certain events that mattered more towards the overall series. It matters now, though, so I can bring it up. At the end of the Twisted ones, Charlie is caught by Twisted Freddy, and before she's able to escape, the spring locks activate and crush her. But the book ends with Charlie reappearing, and her boyfriend, John, being suspicious of her. Then, the 4th closet shifts focus entirely, because this time, John is the protagonist, and he's navigating through a life where everyone is trying to push him to reunite with Charlie, despite his reservations. Eventually, the first of 2 big reveals happens. This new Charlie is revealed to actually be Baby, and she looks like Charlie using the illusion discs. At Charlie's aunt's house, John discovers the real Charlie alive in a chest. But the thing is, on top of Charlie being Baby in this universe, Elizabeth Afton is still the soul possessing her. It's a really weird book. Then, near the end of the book, it's revealed that Charlie is actually one of 4 robots made by Henry after Afton killed her. Henry, in his grief, built 4 robots, one for each stage of her life. A baby, a preteen, a teenager, and an adult. Henry killed himself before finishing the adult version, which eventually was taken by Afton and turned into Baby. The book delves more into Afton's motivations. He was mostly jealous of Henry after he made the Charlie bots, and he aimed to recreate that, which is why he started killing. but then eventually, seeing how he brought life to the animatronics, he wanted to give himself immortality, so classic mad scientist shit. The last thing of note is that Afton melted down the endoskeletons of the classic robots into an amalgamation of Remnant, which he was using to do experiments. He put Remnant into the fun times, he injected it straight into one of the main characters, and this allowed him to interact with the souls of the missing children's incident. Specifically, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy. Those are really the big things to focus on. Charlie is a robot, Afton is jealous of Henry, and the classics got melted together. There isn't really much to break down at the moment in regards to Charlie being a robot. Like I mentioned, there was a period of time where people thought Mike was the crying child, and so every appearance he made after FNAF 4 was him as a robot. But that never caught enough traction because it was never true. Afton's jealousy makes sense as a motivation, to be honest. Applying it to the games works. It explains why Afton's first victim was Charlie. His son died at the hands of one of Henry's robots, so Afton took Henry's kid from him too. And once he got a taste, he just kept going. But really, the only thing I care about right now is to talk about the Remnant amalgamation. This has become somewhat accepted within the lore of the franchise, because admittedly, there are some things that point towards it. However, it is my understanding that this can't happen in the games, because it just doesn't fit. Now, assuming that my timeline has been right so far, the biggest issue with this is that Afton takes apart the FNAF 1 robots before the events of the game. So, just through that alone, he can't have taken the endos, melted them, and used them on the fun times, because the original robots still need to exist for FNAF 1 to happen. If we start rearranging things to account for this, then it becomes really messy. If Afton did this after FNAF 1, that means the fun times get possessed later. Michael goes to the bunker later, and now he has no ties to being the FNAF 1 guard. There's also the entire fucking Happiest Day minigame, which is supposed to represent everyone except Cassidy and the puppet for some reason, being released from the animatronics and allowed to rest. If Happiest Day really happened, then it's impossible for the MCI victims to be in the fun times. Other than maybe Cassidy, since we never see an endoskeleton for Golden Freddy. But I don't know. If you want the MCI spirits in the fun times, then Happiest Day can't be canon. And that would be an insane retcon, considering Scott actively retconned it to be about the crying child. So, what we have to remember is that sometimes the books tell their own stories. Just because Charlie is baby in this novel, it doesn't mean Charlie is baby in the games. And just because Afton melted the classics in this book, it doesn't mean that fits within the game timeline. And if it somehow does, then fuck me, Scott's making shit up as he goes. My explanation for the funtime possessions are the toys. They get scrapped after FNAF 2, we see their shells in FNAF 3, but we never see their endoskeletons. Afton had the resources and ability to take the endos and use them however he wanted before getting himself spring-locked, so maybe the funtimes are possessed by the FNAF 2 robots.
This one's pretty simple to break down lore-wise. It's Afton being tortured by Cassidy. Sometimes when you die, you can see an inverted face smiling at you. Also, if you die to one of the mediocre melodies, there's a chance you'll get a voice line where they're taunting you. In the background of said voice lines, there's another voice whispering exactly what the robots are supposed to be saying.
We've only just begun. I will never let you leave. I will never let you rest.
Someone is keeping you trapped here for all eternity. We know from some other voice lines that this is someone you shouldn't have killed, making you the killer. So you're playing as Afton. It's also confirmed that it's after Pizza Sim because the voice says,
"He tried to release you. He tried to release us. But I'm not gonna let that happen. I will hold you here. I will keep you here. No matter how many times they burn us."
Now, this implies that whoever this is was present during the fire at the end of Pizza Sim. The casting call for the whispering voice was listed as Vengeful Spirit, but we know it's Golden Freddy because beating a knight with 49 out of the 50 animatronics will queue up a cutscene with Golden Freddy. There's melancholic piano playing as the suit twitches, showing that despite everything, Cassidy isn't ready to move on. She just hates Afton too much and is willing to prolong her suffering to make sure that he gets his. Now, there are some inconsistencies. The one you should not have killed is referred to as a guy, whereas Cassidy is a girl. Unless you assume that the voice line refers to Golden Freddy as the suit and not the soul, or unless you think that Cassidy in the fourth closet is a different gender than she is in the game. Otherwise, I don't have an explanation. Now, there are a couple other things to take note of. Getting new high scores cue up certain cutscenes. They alternate between an anime-esque ninja cartoon where Freddy vows revenge on Foxy, his sworn enemy, and a high school anime where Toy Chica lures and kills a bunch of other animatronics because they don't share the crush she has on them. There are a couple interpretations for what the Freddy ninja cutscenes are about. Some people believe they're stand-ins for Henry and Afton, Henry being Freddy and Afton being Foxy. Others believe it's a representation of playful banter between siblings, with the crying child being Freddy, Michael being Foxy, and Mangle being Elizabeth. I'm not really going to speak to either theory because I don't think these have much lore relevance. On the other hand, the Toy Chica ones matter more. The common understanding is that these cutscenes represent Afton luring his various victims. There are a total of 7: Freddy, the Wolf, Toy Bonnie, the Puppet, Pig Patch, Funtime Foxy, and then you can see Foxy's hook in her last cutscene, which is separate from Funtime Foxy because they don't have a hook. If we believe this to represent Afton, then it's the first time that he's been portrayed as having more than 6 victims in a short time span. Obviously he killed Charlie, then Gabriel, Fritz, Jeremy, Susie, and Cassidy, but that adds up to 6, and these cutscenes show 7. Who's the extra? No answers just yet. All there is to do is add this little addendum to the end of the timeline. After everything burns, Cassidy attaches herself to Afton and refuses to let him move on. Wherever he was meant to go, he can't get to because she wants him to suffer. And suffer he does every time anybody hits play, sets a new challenge, a new high score. Afton is forced to live through the torture over and over and over and over again. That's all there is to it. This game is also pretty easy to break down. Honestly, Ultimate Custom Night and Help Wanted both being very easy to understand led a lot of people to have hope for where the series was going. Unfortunately, this is the last time where I'm 100% sure about what's going on. So, since the story is so simple, sit back, relax, I'm just gonna power through it. This is an in-universe VR game made by Fazbear Entertainment to clear the air about things that have happened at Fazbear locations. Apparently, a rogue indie game developer created a bunch of games slandering Fazbear Entertainment, and this VR game is meant to recreate those games as a way to poke fun at the lies that this game developer spread. So you have a VR recreation of FNAF 1 to 3, reimaginings of 4, animatronic repairs, vent repairs, etc. Hidden throughout these games are various tapes placed by a beta tester who noticed some odd things during the development of the game. Fazbear Entertainment sent over a bunch of scrap tech and circuit boards to help speed up the process. Once the game developers actually used it, something entered the game and took the form of a classic yellow rabbit. So say hello to some form of Afton, dubbed Glitch Trap this time. From there, it tried to get out of the game through the beta tester, Jeremy. He fought against it and tried to bring attention to the virus, but instead, the company tried to fire him. Before that though, he cut his face off. Then, the tape girl got sent to be the next beta tester, and immediately she found the glitch too. However, the problem was that due to some legal issues, their company was selling the game off to another company, our company, and this girl was going to be the last person testing the game. So she created a series of logs hidden in the game files to warn whoever came next. This included information about Jeremy, about the circuit boards, and most interestingly, that Fazbear Entertainment actually hired the indie game developer to create the games that this VR game is based on. So, to break that down, Fazbear Entertainment hired a game developer to create games that made light of the tragedies at their restaurants. Then, they made a VR game to make light of the tragedies even more, essentially as a PR move so they could get back to making money. Nice. Then, the tape girl realizes that because of how she hid the logs, the glitch attached itself to them, meaning that every tape we collect brings it closer and closer to us. But she has a solution. If you let it start to merge with you, you can flip some switches, push some buttons, yada yada, and it will hard boot the game, theoretically killing it. Obviously, that doesn't work. In fact, every possible ending in this game shows the rabbit being free and you being trapped somewhere. So the only real takeaway is that the rabbit successfully took over someone's mind. And that it did. In the Halloween DLC, there's a minigame where you have to collect a key in a corn maze and escape through the same colored door as your key. However, if you collect all 4 keys, a 5th one will spawn, which opens this cellar door. Going in there gets you a weird bunny mask. Wearing the mask will give you one side of a conversation about making a costume and finding a target. The description given for this voice role was a reluctant follower, giving us our first look at the mask of whoever was controlled by the glitch. However, given the term reluctant follower, it means that whoever's here isn't fully controlled by the glitch. Rather, there's a power struggle. It's a voice in her head, and that is the story of Help Wanted. Chuck it straight to the end of the timeline. There isn't much to delve into because it's pretty cut and dry. The only question is whether the rabbit is a manifestation of Afton or if it's something else. That's a question that will be expanded upon soon, but for now, let's get into some real fucking retcons. Fuck me. This book series is the spawn of Satan. It is single-handedly responsible for how confusing the series has gotten. Okay, well that's not entirely true, but it is the piece of media that fucks up most of our understanding of everything we knew up to this point. I'm going to be focusing on the stories that I know are important, so I'm sorry if I miss anything that you guys deem important, and if I do, please sure to let me know in the comments. But as far as I know, the most important ones are Into the Pit, The Man in Room 1280, The Real Jake, and the epilogues. For Into the Pit, if you know the game, you know the book, so I'ma lump them together, even though they are different. Oswald gets fed up with his boring-ass summer, so he decides to prank his dad by hiding in a ball pit. However, that ball pit takes him to 1985, in the height of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. One of the times he goes back, he ends up witnessing the missing children's incident, although there's one notable difference. The yellow rabbit has 6 victims here. Get this shit off me! Ah! Anyways, Oswald's dad gets taken by the rabbit, so Oswald has to go save him, blah blah blah. 6 kids? 6? Why? Everything up to this point has pointed towards 5 kids. Charlie first, then 5 kids, then 5 more kids. This 6th kid is explained in both the epilogues and The Man in Room 1280. This one revolves around Afton following Pizza Sim. He's burnt beyond belief, and he should really be dead, but he just isn't. He's suffering from terrible nightmares, the hospital has found that he has 2 distinct brainwaves, and all of the nurses see a boy with curly black hair who wears an alligator mask. The nurses know that he's evil, and they try to kill him multiple times, but the boy in the mask keeps intervening and keeping him alive. Eventually, though, the man is taken to a Fazbear distribution center, and he blows up. Now, before I touch on this more, I'm just going to explain the final story. The Real Jake is about a kid who has a brain tumor and is confined to his bed because he's too weak to do anything else. Every night, he talks to his friend Simon, who lives in a cabinet. Simon is actually Jake's father, who is actively shipped out in the military, and every night he asks what the Real Jake has been up to. Jake would make up stories about what he wishes he could do, and as Jake would tell more stories, his caretaker would work on the doll that incorporates the details of each story. Unfortunately, Jake's father is killed by an IED, so Simon stops coming to visit Jake. With that, it doesn't take long for Jake to pass as well, and he goes on to possess the doll, and that's what leads us to the epilogues. The story begins with Dr. Phineas Taggart. He was doing experiments in regards to possessions. It's through him that we get a better understanding of how the spirits come to possess things. It's through emotions, very strong emotions, that get poured from the person into the object. He believes that the strongest source for this is agony. So, he got his hand on a bunch of possessed objects and used them to make an endoskeleton which goes on to be known as the Stitch Wraith. One of the objects he uses is the Real Jake doll, but one of the other haunted objects had the spirit of Andrew. The Stitch Wraith ends up killing Phineas, and it escapes and starts killing other people, sparking a police investigation which takes up most of the epilogues. However, we do get some conversations between Andrew and Jake, where it's revealed that Andrew was the spirit attaching himself to Afton. The story then progresses to being fucking wild as hell. Afton attaches himself to a bunch of trash and becomes a trash robot. Then there's another entity known as Eleanor that was giving Afton strength, but then they defeat her with a puppet's mask or something. I don't fucking know. None of that matters. What really matters is the initial story regarding Andrew, Afton, and Jake. There are a lot of parallels to things we know about the games, but the way things play out also calls some things into question. Obviously, the state of Afton is consistent with what we know happens in UCN, but the biggest question is this fucking Andrew kid. The thing is, his role throughout these stories very clearly mirrors that of Golden Freddy within the games. First, he's an MCI victim. Check. He attached himself to Afton to make him suffer horrible nightmares following the end of Pizza Sim. Check. He shares a body with another young kid who died due to some sort of head trauma. Check. There's also the fact that in UCN, the vengeful spirit is referred to as he, which fits more with Andrew here than it does with Cassidy, who was described as a little girl with dark, black hair. So, given how it lines up, people started to think that Andrew is the actual spirit possessing Golden Freddy, and he's the one who was torturing Afton. But here's the thing, I'm gonna be so real here. Whether this is true or not, this is the dumbest shit that could possibly happen. I want to be crystal clear. I'm not bashing anyone for believing this. I can't blame them. But I think that it's fucking stupid from a storytelling perspective. For 6 years, there were 5 missing children victims, and there's an entire puzzle book with an in-depth solution to find a name that was hidden in Pizza Sim. 6 gravestones, the main 5 MCI kids, and Charlie. Now, all of a sudden, you want me to believe that the real key player is a kid who didn't exist until now? Fuck that. But since it's generally accepted as a theory, I guess I'll just count it as a retcon. But I hate it. I hate this so much. The only reason that I don't fully blame Fazbear Frights for how fucked the lore is because this game exists. This game is such a mess, and all of the lore is conveyed so poorly that nobody knew what the fuck was going on. There's a wild amount of hidden shit, and almost none of it makes any sense. So, we know the main gist of the game, which is that Gregory sneaks into Freddy when he malfunctions and gets locked in the Pizzaplex overnight, having to avoid multiple killer robots and a white rabbit out to get him. This white rabbit is Vanny. She's sporting the same mask we saw in Help Wanted, so this is the continuation of the stuff regarding Afton's apparent reincarnation through the Fazbear circuit boards. This reveals itself through a sort of multiple personality situation, where Vanessa is the security guard of the Pizzaplex, and Vanny is her evil alter ego. Funnily enough, that's about the extent of the main story, because literally nothing happens in this game. There are 6 endings and multiple hidden things, such as Michael Afton's room being under the main building for some reason. There are also a bunch of therapy discs that you can collect around the Pizzaplex. In said tapes, there are 2 patients, patient 46 and 71. The tapes make it clear that 71 is Vanessa, and her sessions go into detail about her past and her recent odd behaviors. Most notably, she's been caught engaging in encrypted messages with someone who appears to be manipulating her. There's also somebody who hacked into her personal files. We also see that the therapists in these tapes keep going missing, which is something that Vanessa reacts to in her second tape. Meanwhile, patient 46 is seemingly Gregory, and in his tapes, you get some interesting information about him. He's very proficient with computers. He's been caught on tape talking to some rabbit-esque thing. He is responsible for hacking into the programming of the Pizzaplex and causing the animatronics to act in a more eerie manner than how they're supposed to be. And he also appears to have encrypted messages, where the therapists believe that he's been manipulating someone. Now, the biggest thing to note is that Gregory also has to deal with the changing therapists, because it's revealed that the ones who came before have all gone missing. 2 of them are still missing, while one of them has been found mangled to death by machinery. As I mentioned, Vanessa has reactions to this, while Gregory is directly told about the death of his previous therapist and has no reaction whatsoever. Now, everything we learn about Gregory here is very inconsistent with how he acts during the game. A theory that developed from this is that Gregory was actually under Glitchtrap's control, just like Vanessa. Now, there are other oddities in this game that kinda go unexplained. When you shatter Chica, you end up underneath the Pizzaplex, and on your way back, you come across a room covered in sticky notes. The notes have a bunch of binary code and drawings. Translating the code shows a little progression from single words to smaller phrases, almost as if this is some sort of AI gaining sentience. Above it, there's a table with staff bots who are all dressed like members of the Afton family. One is missing its head, one is baby, one is similar to Ballora, and then there's the head of the table and Michael. This, coupled with the fact that Gregory had no guest ID and he goes homeless in the escape ending, led people to think that Gregory has been hiding out in the Pizzaplex. But not only that, there was a theory that Gregory was the crying child rebuilt as a robot. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time. I honestly can't fault MatPat for this theory. It made sense at the time. Gregory looks like the crying child, who's long dead at this point, and the signs point to some sort of AI gaining sentience, along with Gregory hiding out in the Pizzaplex. However, we do know that this isn't true, so I'm just gonna ignore it. The last thing to touch on would be the other 2 main endings. One of them is the Princess Quest ending, where Gregory plays all 3 Princess Quest arcade machines and frees Vanessa from Glitchtrap's control. And the other is the one where you go deeper than you've ever gone before, and you find the remains of the Pizza Sim restaurant below the fucking Pizzaplex. And then, going below the fucking restaurant gets you face to face with motherfucking Afton. You have to burn him again, and then there's a cutscene where everything burns down and yada yada. This game does nowhere near enough to explain what anything truly means, not even the main story. The main story is completely inconsistent. Gregory wants to hide from Vanessa for no discernible reason. He doesn't know she's Vanny until Freddy points it out, which is dumb as hell, but whatever. At the end, Gregory brings up a bunch of missing kids that were never brought up before this, and will never be brought up again. And of course, there's the Blob, which seems to be some version of Molten Freddy. Whatever the fuck is going on in this game is very unclear, but I'll try to add it to the timeline as best as possible. Starting from before Fredbear's Family Diner, there are retro posters for Fredbear's singing show. I don't know when this would have happened, but it's definitely pre-70s. Then, there are also posters for Fredbear's Diner, which have a 70s aesthetic, so we'll just add 1970 something to the date of Fredbear's. Fast forward somewhere after the events of Pizza Sim, Fazbear Entertainment launched a new project, a mega pizzaplex built over the pizza place for some reason. While this is happening, they launch a game meant to regain goodwill in the public eye, and start a new chapter for their company, aka Help Wanted. After that, Vanessa is the recipient of the Mind Meld, but obviously, it didn't give Afton as much control as he wanted. But Vanessa wasn't his only victim. Gregory also somehow got infected, and got controlled by Afton. He further manipulated Vanessa, got her personal info, killed 3 therapists who knew too much, and reprogrammed the robots, causing them to act weird. Somehow, before the start of the game, Gregory escaped Afton's control and started hiding away in the Pizzaplex, and 9 kids go missing. I don't know. Then, Freddy malfunctions, and thus begins the main plot. Gregory avoids Vanessa for 6 hours, destroys the animatronics, and then... Security breach doesn't make it clear which ending is canon, so what happens next is questionable, so I'll leave it there for now. I'm gonna lump Ruin in together with these books because they kinda reveal the same things, or at least these 2 projects go hand in hand. I think that, in the grand scheme of things, these books aren't as confusing as Fazbear Frights. But I'm saying that with hindsight. The biggest question to come out of this book series is whether or not they were directly canon to the games. The short answer is no, but that's with my future knowledge of how the games follow up with all of this information. At the time these books were coming out, they seemed to provide extra context for a lot of what happened in Security Breach, and even some things that came before it. There are stories like GGY, which delve deeper into Gregory's character and the things he's been doing, like the fact that if Gregory feels like someone is learning a bit too much about him, he lures them to the Pizzaplex and lets the animatronics deal with them. That's presumably how the 3 therapists died in the games, and in the book, this is how he killed a school counselor, along with 2 unknown victims. This is seemingly directly connected to the games. GGY is the abbreviation of Gregory's name on the arcade machines in the Pizzaplex, a detail that is consistent with what we see in Security Breach. We also find out that Gregory hacked the robots and has a day pass that he hacked to give him admin access. All this information directly lines up with stuff that happens in the game. There are some inconsistencies, most notably with the way the Pizzaplex looks, but most people explain that away by saying that these stories took place a while before Security Breach, so the look of the Pizzaplex just changed over time. Now, there are a few important stories here, just like in Fazbear Frights, except these ones all introduce things that are genuinely relevant and not awful retcon theories. The most important stories are The Mimic, The Storyteller, Tiger Rock, and the epilogues. The Mimic introduces the Murrays, a family of 2. There's Edwin. He made the Mimic. He was a contractor for Fazbear Entertainment. He even did work on building some of the animatronics. His wife died in childbirth, so he has to manage his work with raising his kid, David.
My name is David!
In order to have more time to work, he did what any good father would do. Child neglect.
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck, man?
He built an endoskeleton that would keep David busy, alongside a crazy advanced AI program that he dubbed Mimic 1. It was meant to replicate what it sees, and learn through said repetition. Thus, David would play with the Mimic, and Edwin would work to build Fazbear animatronics. The Mimic even developed this little arm movement because of how David would hold his favorite tiger toy. Anyways, one day, David chases his ball toy out on the road and gets hit by a fucking car. The Mimic learned to communicate with David and Edwin through actions, so when the Mimic does its action to ask for ice cream, Edwin beats its ass and then fucking disappears. Somewhere along the way, he repaired the Mimic, but since he went MIA, Fazbear Entertainment repos his workshop, including the Mimic. This leads into the epilogues, where during Fazbear's attempted rebranding, they decided to renovate and reopen the old pizza place as a museum. So, to help out with the progress, the workers gave the Mimic instructions to take apart other endoskeletons. Once its job is done, it moves on to the workers themselves, and in the end, the pizza place entrance got sealed off with concrete to ensure that the Mimic couldn't escape, and that nobody else went inside. Another notable thing is that later, a bunch of kids sneak in and get killed by the Mimic, where a new ability of that endoskeleton is that it can change its shape to fit within any animatronic suit. Then, the Pizzaplex was built on top of the pizza place. 40 years after Edwin went MIA, he made his return in The Storyteller, and he came back as a board member of the Pizzaplex. The head member, Mr. Burrows, is unsatisfied with how much money the Pizzaplex is making, so he decides to fire the creative team and run a Storyteller AI in its place. They create a giant tree, symbolizing how the Storyteller has its roots in every corner of the Pizzaplex, and the AI itself is run out of an animatronic tiger head with one blue and one green eye. Once the AI is implemented, things around the Pizzaplex start to shift for the worse. Roxanne Wolf becomes pompous and cruel, Chica becomes fixated on food and attention, and Monty becomes violent. Edwin was denied access to the tree and to the finer details of the project, so he sneaks in and finds out that the Storyteller AI is actually the Mimic 1 program. Then, Mr. Burrows locks Edwin in the tree, and he suffocates to death, leaving strange symbols around the place, likely as an attempt to communicate with the Mimic. Last but not least, there's Tiger Rock, which quite frankly doesn't connect to the Mimic plot all that much outside of the fact that the main threat is a tiger with one blue and one green eye. Ruin ends up confirming that a lot of the things here exist within the games. In Ruin, you play as Cassie, a girl who returns to the Pizzaplex after it caves in. She goes there to save Gregory, who reached out to her to save him. Although it turns out, it was the Mimic using Gregory's voice to manipulate her into freeing it. We get to see what the Mimic looks like, and we also see it wear an amalgamation of a lion and elephant costume, and it sports that exact same hand pose that it got from David all those years ago. These lore reveals actually give a lot of context to what the story has been from Help Wanted to Security Breach, although it does contradict some stuff as well. It gives context to what we saw in the Afton ending of Security Breach, and just in general explains a lot. So, the Afton we saw at the end of Security Breach is the Mimic. We can tell because of the exact same hand position as the Mimic in Ruin and the novels. Considering it's trapped under the Pizzaplex and has the same design feature, it's a pretty easy conclusion that this is the Mimic. However, Ruin confirms that this is a non-canon ending, with the canon one being the Princess Quest ending, freeing Vanessa from Glitchtrap's control. We know this because of the sword in the arcade machine, plus the fact that Gregory made drawings of every ending of Security Breach except for the Princess Quest one. However, the fact that the Pizzaplex is on top of the pizza place and the Mimic being trapped down there is all true. Then, there's the Mimic 1 program, which at face value explains why the animatronics are all acting weird in Security Breach. Except that was also explained by GGY. It's a little contradictory, but whatever. The last thing to touch on is that Glitchtrap is also likely the Mimic 1 program. Given that Fazbear Frights went into detail about possessions, it never really made sense if Afton's spirit possessed the circuit boards used in Help Wanted. Why would his agony possess a circuit board? Well, the clear answer is that it didn't. Rather, Fazbear Entertainment sent over circuit boards with the Mimic 1 program, which mimics Afton from Pizza Party, and eventually escapes the game through Gregory and Vanessa. Now, since I portrayed the Glitchtrap as Afton, you might think that this is a retcon. But for the first time, I genuinely think that this is Scott's intended story, and that the pieces to understand it just didn't exist until Tales from the Pizzaplex came out, which the information does actually make a lot of sense, and makes for a really interesting story. However, a story should be built on understanding. We shouldn't have to wait 3 years to get the pieces needed to understand what's happening. I understand that COVID was a thing, but Fazbear Frights could have had this lore in it, or at least had the Mimic story, which could have been followed up in Tales from the Pizzaplex. But I digress. Let's amend our timeline. We gotta go back to the beginning for this one. After Fredbear's Diner, somewhere in the late 70s, Edwin Murray gets his start working with robotics for Fazbear Entertainment. He builds the Mimic, which eventually is possessed by his agony over David's death. Then, Edwin goes MIA, and the Mimic program and Endo is repoed by Fazbear Entertainment. Then, everything we already covered happens, up till Help Wanted, where Fazbear is trying to clean up their reputation. They begin work on a museum that becomes a prison for the Mimic, later becoming the Mega Pizzaplex. Meanwhile, the Mimic 1 program is implemented into Help Wanted, mimicking Afton and escaping through Gregory and Vanessa. It's also implemented into the Pizzaplex, causing the animatronics to act weird and more aggressive than usual. Eventually, Gregory escapes the Mimic's control and spends a night in the Pizzaplex hiding from Vanny, destroying the robots, etc. He manages to free Vanessa from the Mimic's control, and together they create Mixes, a security device meant to keep the Mimic trapped underneath the Pizzaplex. But it still manages to contact Cassie, who makes her way through the Pizzaplex to quote-unquote save Gregory. With the help of her Faz Wrench, a tool that belongs to Fazbear technicians, she deactivates the security and comes face to face with the Mimic. She mentions that her dad used to have a Faz Wrench, so her dad was a technician here. Gregory helps Cassie escape, but then either Gregory decides to drop the elevator to make sure that the Mimic can't escape, or it could be the Mimic who drops it to make sure Cassie doesn't escape. Who knows, it's never followed up on. This one's kind of simple, so I'm going to rush through it. In this game, you play as an actual Fazbear technician, tasked with doing maintenance and repairs on various animatronics and attractions. Eventually, though, you end up in the ruins of the pizza place, and you end up being the technician who does repairs on some of the shattered robots following Security Breach. Anyways, the main ending has you collecting a series of Fazbear toys, and doing that leads you to seemingly possessing a staff bot in the Pizzaplex and giving Cassie the tools she used to free the Mimic in Ruin. There's another ending where you complete another Princess Quest game and you see Vanny crush Glitchtrap. Again, unclear what the canon ending is, but whatever. Just add a little bit in between Security Breach and Ruin where a Fazbear technician, potentially Cassie's father, ends up becoming the staff bot. While this game doesn't necessarily fuck up the timeline, it does make the whole mimic shit a lot more confusing than it needs to be. Like I said, the short answer to Tails' canonicity was no, and the long answer is this entire fucking game. See, it goes out of its way to contradict everything that the books introduced, and it actually makes shit so confusing that one of the theories that spawned from this is that Afton killed Edwin's son. I hate it here. Let me break down the most important things. It turns out that Chica is actually a character created by Fiona, Edwin's wife. It had actually been theorized that Chica was added to the Fazbear brand at a later date due to Afton's partnership with Henry, but none of that was ever confirmed, and it was based off of Sister Location's lack of a Funtime Chica, but that wasn't really solid evidence because the Funtimes were made after Henry and Afton worked together. But now, we know for sure that Chica wasn't created by Henry or William. In the last few games, there have been a lot of references to something called Fall Fest. In the game's canon, this is how Fiona dies, at some fire or big catastrophe, not during childbirth. Now, because of this, we got our first big change to the lore. Edwin creates a robot Fiona, and she is the original version of the Mimic. We see her endoskeleton in some tapes during one of the endings. Then, David dies. It's honestly unclear if Afton did kill him, or if he just died to a car like in the books. I think it's a car, because Edwin built a playground for him near loading docks, so it just makes sense that it's a car. Anyways, David dies, Edwin recreates him as a robot, which becomes M2, the Mimic endoskeleton that we see in Ruin and in the novels. Now, this is where shit gets real whack. Edwin, in a rage, deactivates Fiona and still crashes out on M2, which turns it into what we know. Fiona gets delegated to being a program running out of this box. However, if you notice, this box is the exact same as the one that Mix's was running in during Ruin. So, Fiona is seemingly also Mix's. But it gets even worse. Considering that Fiona is the original Mimic, that makes her M1 and David M2. So, since Fiona was the original, her program is also the same M1 program that gets put into Help Wanted, becomes Afton, and takes control of Gregory, Vanessa, and the whole Pizzaplex. So Fiona is simultaneously trying to fight against M2 while also being one of the main problems. Now, you can also theorize that Glitchtrap isn't the same as Fiona's M1 program, but that would just mean that there are 3 Mimic programs running around, and it makes things even more complicated. There also isn't a clear date for when Secret of the Mimic takes place. It's theorized to take place not long before 83, but who knows for certain, so it's kinda hard to place it in the timeline. So, fuck everything I tried to convey before, we're throwing that out the window and shoving Secret of the Mimic there now, and it's just so fucked, I don't even know. As you can tell, by the last few entries in the series, I kinda lost the plot. I think that it has to do with 2 things that Scott really likes to do with his stories. One is that he tends to change details pretty frequently. It's clear to see when you take a look at the story progression game by game and book by book. By the time he made that retcon post, the story had already been retconned a few times, and it would continue to be retconned even more. Just look at what happened between Ruin and Secret of the Mimic. But the other thing that he likes to do is constantly revisit and reveal new things about the past of Fazbear Entertainment, such as Fiona being the one who created Chica. This is a small detail in the grand scheme of things, but this obsession with going further and further back makes it so much harder to understand the full lore of the series. Tying things back to Afton and Henry, making it so Chica wasn't an original Fazbear character, having Edwin design and build the original FNAF 1 animatronics, as well as the Springlock suits, and even the possibility that Afton was the one who killed David, is all too much. This obsession with tying everything together makes it so much harder to accept this new story, because it never stands out on its own. It's one thing if we see the mimic mimicking Afton. It's another thing if Afton killed David, and Edwin made all the suits, and then M1 mimics Afton, and then M2 starts killing like Afton, and all that bullshit. The way it's progressing, the mimic will always be in Afton's shadow because it's too connected to him, and we can already see that fans don't like this story, and constantly compare it to how much everyone loved the original series. I have my own problems with the gameplay, but I think I would like the current story a lot more if they tried to let it stand on its own. Putting the timeline together was really fun before Secret of the Mimic. When the Mimic was revealed in Tales, I remember being really intrigued by the idea that Glitch Trap was M1, and it made so much sense and really had me invested in the future of the story. But now, I just kinda want to move on from Afton and the Mimic. I don't know where it's gonna go from here, and I am open to more Mimic if the story is right. But to me, it needs to be a standalone thing, where the Mimic isn't connected to Afton, and we're just seeing something new. Now, before I end the video, I want to give a shout out to my friend Can Danny. She did the art for the timeline, and it's impeccable as always. If you haven't already seen her content, please go check it out. Her art's incredible and she's really cool. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I hope you all have a Merry Christmas if you celebrate, and if not, then a happy holiday season. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye bye!